Okay, right now we only have 2 board members. Wondering what happened here. Okay, we got 3 now. All right, my 2 minutes is turned into 10 here. I need 5 to get going. As soon as we do hit 5, I'm going. Okay, I see Eric here.
Eric
is now joining.
Yep, good morning. Diane, can you?
Bob
Where-
live.
Okay,
Is now joining.
we're really slow here to whirl in.
Yeah, I can't connect via.
You're fine. I can hear you. I can hear
I know.
you.
I'm on the phone. I can't,
Okay.
Won't connect me. Just says, sorry, we can't connect you. Retry.
Okay. Well, if you're able to restore, great. And if not,
Now
you're good.
it's back.
Maybe close Teams and reopen it. That sometimes works.
We are currently live, members.
Bob's live.
Okay.
Is now
We are live,
exiting.
but we don't have a quorum yet. So please, everybody, remain muted and recognize your live streaming. Okay, we do have 5, so I'm going to need to roll, get going here. All right, we've got more than 5. We're good. Okay, we're going to move along now. Good morning, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Board of Education. I am Michelle Corkadell, President of the Board. This meeting is being televised live on AACPS TV and streamed live on AACPS YouTube channels. If we are interrupted during the broadcast of this morning and this afternoon's meeting, it will be stopped and we will take a short recess until we can continue. If for some reason we cannot continue, we will notify you as soon as possible when a new meeting will be scheduled. The Board of Education Legal Counsel has asked that I read the following statement. The Maryland Open Meetings Act, state law, requires public meetings to be open to the public and to be held in places reasonably accessible to individuals who would like to attend these meetings. The virtual format of this meetings of the Anne Arundel County Board of Education is due to the COVID-19 emergency and is necessary in light of the serious health risks associated with public gatherings, as well as the governor's and county executives' various executive orders limiting public gatherings. While a virtual meeting of this type was not envisioned by the Open Meetings Act, steps have been taken to ensure that this virtual meeting includes alternate accessibility features that the Open Meetings Act Compliance Board and the courts have reviewed and approved, including broadcasting the meeting with video and audio of cable TV and on the web, and would include allowing written public comment to the governing body to be filed with the board secretary or designee and considered by the Board of Education. The Board of Education's legal counsel has opined that the public access provided by this technology makes this virtual meeting reasonably accessible to the public and therefore complies with the Open Meetings Act. Please now pause for the invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. O God, we pray to administer that which is just in all educational policies. Being ever mindful of your guidance, stir us to action with love, wisdom, and understanding. And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will now start with a roll call of our members, of my fellow members. Ms. Hummer. Here. Mr. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Ellis. Here. Mr. Grannon,
Here.
Ms. Schallheim,
Present.
Ms. Antwine. Here. Mr. Grannon, Mr. Gilliland,
Here.
Mr. Ladd.
Here.
Great. And now up is item 2.03 is the approval of the minutes. The board will now at this time accept notions of requests for edit or entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 17th, 2020.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. I have a motion and a second. Any comments or edit suggestions at this time? Going once, going twice. Seeing no movement from the board, Ms. Howe, please call roll for the approval of the meeting minutes of June 17th, 2020.
Ms. Hummer,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Abstain.
Ms. Ellis,
Aye.
Mr. Grannon,
Aye.
Ms. Schallheim,
Aye.
Ms. Antwine,
Aye.
Mr. Gilliland,
Aye.
Mr. Live,
Aye.
Ms. Corkido.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0, 1 abstention.
Next is item 2.04, establish agenda order. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda as draft published?
So moved.
Second. We have a motion by Mr. Smith and seconded by Ms. Hummer. Do we have any comments or amendments proposed at this time? Seeing no action of the board, Ms. Howe, please call roll on approval of the agenda as published.
Ms. Hummer,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Ms. Ellis,
Aye.
Mr. Grannon,
Aye.
Ms. Schallheim,
Aye.
Ms. Antwine,
Aye.
Mr. Gilliland,
Aye.
Mr. Live,
Aye.
Ms. Corkido.
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
Thank you, Ms. Howe. Next item is 2.05, recognitions. And we have, no.
No recognitions today.
Really?
That was correct.
Okay.
Unless you know something that I don't, which could very well be the case.
I think it is. So I wanted to take this moment to
Ms. Ms. Corkido,
Yes,
that recognition has been moved to August.
I know. I know. I had also hoped that Dr. Arlotto and his team was going to assist me in recognizing you, Ms. Howe, and take this moment to recognize you because, when August, Ms. Howe was put in a very unique situation. She replaced a long-term executive assistant of the board, as some of you may recall, and was amidst her first year onboarding when COVID hit. And barring any coup plan that the board never anticipated needing, she worked very collaboratively with Mr. Mosier and myself and others to keep the board running. And I can tell you that personally, as the person who kind of oversees the administration and operations on behalf of the board, that was a mountain moved like none other. And so, Ms. Howe, you will be receiving a citation of recognition from the board over the coming times. I had hoped that it would have been ready by staff by now, but amidst all of our COVID stuff, we've got a lot of important things going on. but I just wanted to take a minute. We recognize a lot of people, but it's the people in the background that keep things humming. And so I know that Mr. Burns, who also works very closely, our legal counsel with Diane, also had a couple words to say, and then I'll open it up to our board in general to also speak, and if Dr. Arlotto or his staff had any words also as well. So, Mr. Burns, I believe you had a thing or two to speak on Ms. Howell's recognition.
I just want to say that as often happens with some of the more indispensable people in any position, but particularly in public service positions, what you don't know and what you don't see and what you don't hear is probably forms 2/3 of her workload. And you should know, because Diane and I work on stuff all the time, that she has her eyes and ears open on a lot of different things. I could not accomplish some of what I have to get accomplished for this board without her ability to keep things on track, her ability to frankly remind me at times of things. But most importantly, she's been a quick study because, things have evolved very quickly over the years. And whether it's new state laws, new state board policies and regulations about appeals, whether it is about Open Meetings Act, which is constantly being tweaked in its interpretation, or Public Records Act, Diane works hard with Mr. Mosier's office and with Dr. Arlotto's office and with my office to keep everything in the right channels, I guess is the right way to say it, and to keep everything on track. And without belaboring the point, I just want to say I am happy that this year, of all years, we have had her as your executive assistant, and that I think there will only be better things to come. And I look forward to working with her. And I really do appreciate what Diane has accomplished for this board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burns. I'm going to open up the floor now. Round robin. I'm sure our members would like to express their appreciation, and I think doing so in a public forum is most appropriate. It's the least we can do for Ms. Howell. Ms. Hummer?
Yes, Diane knows how amazing I think she is, and I always appreciate her positive attitude, her professionalism, and how she's always available when we have any questions. So thank you, Diane.
You're muted.
Michelle, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Smith, any comments?
Thank you so much. This transition, from student to student member, can be a daunting one. All the new stuff I'm learning, going from a student to the behind the scenes operations of a school, and you just made it all such a smooth transition. And I cannot thank you enough, from getting my paperwork in to helping me set up, just how to be a board member. Just thank you is not enough for all the work that you've done. And you really just helped me a lot. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Ms. Ellis?
Ms. Howe, more thanks from me. I greatly appreciated how welcoming you were when I first became a board member, how extremely helpful you were. It is, as Mr. Smith just experienced, it's quite an effort to get up to speed and hit the ground running, and you were very instrumental in that. Your dedication, you have gone above and beyond, and I have countless examples of that. So I just want to share my appreciation for all that you do for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Mr. Grannon?
Thank you, President Corkadell. I'll just say briefly that, the entire school system should just really realize what a treasure Ms. Howell is. She personifies quiet excellence, and literally every interaction I've had with her for close to 5 years now has been one of just total competence, calm under pressure, kindness, just a wonderful person to work with, who just gets things done for the school system. And she's a real treasure. So I hope you will look forward to her services for many years after I'm gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grannon. Ms. Schallheim.
I want to echo all the words of thanks and appreciation that my fellow members have already shared. I echo all the sentiments. Thank you for answering my countless questions and for always being available to me and to all of my colleagues. I'm just really grateful to you. You're the rock that holds, or the glue that holds this ship together, I should say. So, so thank you for all that you do, and don't leave ever. Stay for many, many years, and thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Schallheim. Ms. Antwine?
I just want to say, Ms. Howell, what I've heard, I believe you already knew, but in your humbleness, you've always been professional and graceful about how you approach the needs of 9 different people. In addition to that, though, in COVID, you did not miss a step. You kept us aligned and straightened, and even worked overtime along with Dr. Alato's team and staff to ensure that the public was well informed. So Diane, I have not only appreciated your support to me personally, but greatly appreciate that you do this while wearing the hat of a mom, a wife, and a daughter, and you do them all spectacularly. So thank you for everything. God bless you, and please keep up the good work.
Thank you, Ms. Antwine. Mr. Gilliland?
Thank you, Madam President. Diane, I think when you end up being one of the last to speak, all you really have left to do is say thank you. But I do, as I always have, appreciate all of the work that you do day in and day out, during the on hours as well as the off hours, because I know there's a lot of that as well. And again, the work that you do to help not just us, but to help facilitate activities on behalf of our students, teachers, parents that inquire, etc., is above and beyond. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilliland. Mr. Lai?
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, being the last to speak is pretty interesting in a case like this. Not much left to say, but Diane, being the voice and the public representative of the board on a daily business, I can't thank you enough for all you do to keep us on course, on time, and anchored in reality. So bravo Zulu on a job well done.
Okay. I don't think we have anything too much more to say, except for I know that Diane probably is not inclined to. I know that surprises are a fan of hers, but I just wanted to take this moment, and had I asked her to, she would, in her humble nature that she has, would have declined. So I apologize for the surprise, but I think it's necessary because gratitude with attitude is kind of one of our us as a board underlying motives, and taking a minute to appreciate is not time wasted, but I think an investment into our team efforts, because she's clearly one of the most integral parts of our team at all times, at all moments in time, along with her staff. So thank you once again, Diane. Did you have any closing remarks that you wanted to make?
I just want to say thank you all. I'm very surprised. I'm very embarrassed, but I'm very blessed to have a great job that I enjoy thoroughly, even through its challenges. There are more good days, and I'm very appreciative to all of you. So thank you so much.
I wish we could express more in this virtual environment. If we were in person, I can assure you I would have been there at 6 a.m. with full fanfare at the boardroom and caucus room. Okay, we need to move along. We've got other business to conduct. And without further ado, speaking of good moments in time and unique moments in history, we are about to engage in one by virtue of our new member, Mr. Smith, as our SMOB member. And thank you so very much. It was an honor and a privilege to share in your ceremony of oath taking and to be afforded that opportunity to celebrate with your family and with our fellow board members and course staff. Of course, it was not nearly what any SMOB member has ever seen. So in and of itself, just by virtue of its existence on our calendar, it was a unique moment in history that may never be repeated. And we can only hope not repeated, because that would mean we would still be under this state of emergency come next year. And so we do have SMOB updates from time to time. And so I think it's appropriate that under this circumstance that we had added this to our agenda. Although it typically occurs during our regular monthly reports and our evening meetings, I felt was appropriate. And so, Mr. Smith, you now have the floor honorably.
Thank you, President Corkadell. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everybody who got me to this position. You know, it wasn't just me, it was my family, my friends, just a whole bunch of people. And I cannot thank them enough, because it really takes a village, you know, to get someone from a student to the student member. And I just want to say that we are truly living through unprecedented times. You know, like President Corkadell said, these might never be repeated, and hopefully they never are repeated, you know, because I would much rather see you all in person. But this year will be like no other, as we all know, and I hope to be able to work with each and every one of you, not just the board members, not just the central staff, but everyone watching at home, because, you know, we're a community, really a community organization working for the good of all students, to elevate all students and eliminate all gaps. So I'm looking forward to this year to come, and let's make it one where we really truly, you know, make AACPS in a better place than what I found it.
I look forward to many future SMOB updates, and I know you're going to have a lot to share about your priorities in the coming months, and as well as in participation. Welcome aboard, Mr. Smith, once again. Okay, next is item 3.01, the update on summer learning and fall recovery, and I'll turn this over to Dr. Arlotto. Dr. Arlotto?
Yes, President Corkadell, thank you so much, and members of the board. We'd like to share with you some information regarding enrollments in our summer virtual summer programs. Dr. McMahon is going to walk you through some of that information. We also then want to share with you and the public at large the ongoing planning for the fall of 2020. Certainly that is a conversation that is a hot topic here in Anne Arundel County, across the state and across the country, and about how schools will reopen. So we want to share some information with you from the committees, some of the conversations that are going on, some of the options that we're considering, some of the options that we are ruling out and why that is, as well as sharing some of the information that was gleaned from the survey of our families. And that information is in. As you know, we also have a survey that is still out and live for our staff, and that will be live until Friday of this week. We'll then gather that data and utilize that data and bring it to our 14 working committees for them to consider as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. McMahon to share some information with you, first about summer, the summer programming, and then virtual programming, and then our planning for fall 2020. Dr. McMahon.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. Ms. Corkadell, members of the board, it's a pleasure to be here today. For the record, Maureen McMahon, Deputy Superintendent for Academics, and strategic initiatives. So here we go. One of the last times we were together, we talked about what we were going to do this summer to help with the recovery of learning for our students, and really addressing those students who have opportunity gaps, right? And so let me tell you the story. So the first chart you'll see is an enrollment chart, but it's got some columns in it so that you can see the story. We invited students, and then they enrolled. And then that third column is the percent that accepted our invitations. So you look at that and you step back and you say, so let me give you a little more detail. On the left-hand side, Engage and SOAR and Inspire are elementary programs. The math program is our middle school math transition program. That world language program is for rising sixth graders. And ESY, the extended school year program, are for K through 12 students with special needs who have extended year as part of their IEP, or in this case, during this COVID time, their ICLP. So with that, you may look at that and you may see these percentages and you wonder, but I would tell you this is a story of success. And the reason it's a story of success is because on any given year, we wouldn't have been able to invite this number of students. For example, in our Engage program, which traditionally was called our Summer Academy for elementary, at the K through 2 level, or rising first, second, and third graders, we would have traditionally had 300 students max in that program. So this summer, in a very tough summer, we invited almost 900 students and 307 of them accepted. So in a year that's very tough, when many families said, for lots of different reasons, we just can't. Thank you so much for offering, but we're tired, or we're taking the family to relatives, or we need to be outside this summer because we were inside so much during the spring. Whatever the different stories were, this really here is a story of success. And so let me tell you some more of the story. In the next slide, you'll see one of the programs, the first program, the Engage program. You can see that it's for our rising first, second, and third graders who really require that additional math and language arts support. And so you look around and you say, the pie chart really shows you where the students came from. I'll give you a chance to look at that. Now, what that says is that all of the clusters are represented. In some clusters, remember, this is invited students based on math and reading need. So in some cases, for example, I'll call out Glen Burnie. In the Glen Burnie cluster, which represents 17% of the enrollment here, over 50% of the students who were invited agreed to attend, which again is a story of success. So these numbers are a little interesting. This is not a bad snapshot. It's a pretty good snapshot. It says there are people all around this county engaged. Next, you'll see the enrollment for SOAR. Now, SOAR is our elementary summer academy, this time rising first through sixth graders at our Title I schools. So Title I wise, we only have 6 clusters who have Title I schools. So that's why you only see 6 clusters represented there. Now, the really great news here, over 760 students are enrolled in our Title I SOAR Virtual Academy this summer. Next, you'll see our ESY enrollment, extended school year. Now, we had 87% of our families say yes to us who we invited to this. But that's a little bit of a different story, because if ESY is part of your IEP and you're a special needs student, then you were invited. And the relationship is very, very tight between the teachers, the program administrators, and the folks that actually reach out to those families. They know them well. And so, in fact, this is a story that says most of our students who have ESY on their IEP are actually enrolled this summer. Moving on, we see our middle school program for math. Now, there are about 380 students that were invited to participate in this program, and about 25% of them said yes this summer. In a traditional year, that would have been about 50%. But this year, a little lower. And in fact, as I said at the beginning for the elementary programs, families told us the same stories throughout when we reached out. They really, in many cases, they even asked us to call back and said, give me a few days to think about it. And then either said yes or declined either way. But they had the stories of, in many cases, just we need a little bit of a break. Next, the world language. This is a new program for us virtually and a new way of doing things. It's a 2-week program for rising 6th graders to whet their appetite, get them excited about language. We have 6,700 rising 6th graders, and about 130 of them said, I'd like to do this. And we thought, you know what, that's a success for this summer. It really is a success. And you can see where those students come from the pie chart. And then finally, this is a program you're familiar with. And this is our NG recovery program. And that was for middle and high school students, right? If you'll remember, 6th through 11th graders, rising 7th through 12th graders who received an NG on their report card for 4th quarter, right? They had the opportunity to say, I want to do a little better. I either want to finish because my home situation was really a struggle during the early days of COVID. And so I want to finish the work that I didn't get a chance to finish, or I want to redo, dive in a little deeper. Whatever the case may be, there were 10,133 students that were invited to participate in the NG recovery program based on their 4th quarter grade, no grade, and 723 said yes. And so right now they're fully engaged in trying to move their learning to a higher level this summer with support from our teachers. And last but not least, our traditional summer school program for the secondary students went virtual this summer. Traditionally, it would have had 900-ish students in it. This summer, 1,452 students are engaged, and it hasn't quite closed yet. We left it open till the very, very end. The program starts tomorrow, and we may even get a few more students. Remember, the program is free this year, and we really encourage students to get ready for the next school year, whether that meant remediate or in some cases enhance their learning. In any case, many, many families opted in for secondary summer school. That was a good thing. So that's the end of the summer story. It's a tough summer, and many of our teachers also struggled to decide whether or not they could participate. But we have teachers who opted in to lead all of these various academies and programs in the virtual world, and we have many families taking advantage of it. So it's I'm very excited to be saying we have a viable and robust summer program set of offerings. So Dr. Lotto, would you like me to pause here or go right into fall?
No, I think thank you, Dr. Mann, very much. Very interesting data, and I'm very appreciative of your work and the work of the academics team and everybody to put the summer program together. So yeah, let's take a pause and see if there are board questions. I do want to add to your last point, that's no small detail to not acknowledge, Dr. McMahon and members of the board. Our thanks to the teachers that have volunteered to teach this summer. I know I've been in contact with my colleagues around the state. I know that there are several jurisdictions that really struggle to get teachers to sign on to do summer virtual work. All of our colleagues are doing summer virtual work, much like we are. I don't think it's as robust, but many of them are around the state, which is wonderful. But I do know that they struggled in some instances, I should say, to get teachers to sign on board to do more, just as you said, and reiterated with the board several occasions, that as we invited students and families, they too struggled at point to say, yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready or my child's ready to do more, another 4 weeks or 6 weeks of online learning, right? They need a break. And we totally understand that, but that's the reason we opened it wide and made it free for everybody to join in, as well as the K-8 buffet, which you could come and go. It's not synchronous, it's asynchronous. So you could come and go as your child or your vacation plans or your schedules within your homes dictated. You could still be engaged with some of that fun and robust learning over the course of summer on your own time. But again, I wanted to reiterate that our appreciation, thanks to the number of teachers that did volunteer to step in and work with our students in many of these programs. So I didn't want that to be lost. So with that, I'll turn it over to President Corkadell to go through questions, which we'll attempt to answer, and then we'll get into the fall planning for 2020. Thank you, Dr. McMahon.
I'm going to anticipate and suggest we're going to have questions from multiple members. And so we're going to do our inquiries and roll call order, starting with Ms. Hummer. Ms. Hummer?
Dr. McMahon, I'm sorry, I can't remember the names of each one, but the program that targeted our Title I schools, every student in a Title I school was invited to participate, or were they targeted students within the
They're
school?
still targeted, right? They're still
Okay.
targeted because we're really trying to extend their learning. And so, we're talking about almost 3,500 students. So by the end, we did it in waves. As people declined our offer, we increased the number of invites we put out. So most students, yes, were invited.
And then one more, when you sent these invitations, you said that you reached out and you spoke with them. What was the follow-up process? So initial invitation, and then were they contacted personally?
Yes, everybody had personal, in many cases, multiple personal phone calls or emails or texts. We knew this summer would be challenging. So in all of the programs, people were ready to follow up. And so in some cases, it went out from the school level, and then the follow-up was school-based. In other cases, it went out from central office, and the follow-up was both central office-based and school-based. Counselors and principals to engage.
Great, thank you. And I'm sure that as you contacted them, if the parent expressed any concerns about being able to access the lessons, that any help was given to make sure there were devices and internet connection and all of that.
Right. And so when we got them involved and they said yes to us, then they were asked the next question: do you need a Chromebook? Do you have a device? And so in many cases, we use this opportunity to move forward with the notion of giving every student a Chromebook. And so any students enrolled in our summer program are going to receive a Chromebook if their family doesn't already have one.
Great. Thank you so much.
Michelle, you're on mute.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Dr. McMahon. I only have a few questions. The first one is, can students still enroll in these programs, or?
So pretty much the end of the day today is the last for the summer school program. That's a secondary summer school program. The other programs, if we've already invited you, we're still following up with a few families, probably a little less than 50 families at this time in many of the programs. But yes, there's still an opportunity, but really many of them have begun their work.
And and off that question, so which programs have already begun?
So the NG program starts next week. So it's begun in the sense that we have to talk to all of the students individually. We have to assign them to their teachers. The secondary summer school starts tomorrow for those. The Title I SOAR program and Engage, they have begun their work. Math has begun its work, and the World Language program is slated to start in a week.
And with the programs that have already started, you said the math program, you know how many students have been showing up You
The
have-
middle school math program, right? Those are students that are in transition. So they're rising 7th and 8th grade students, and they're in that transition place where maybe they can have a math 7-8 instead of just a math 7, or maybe they can go into algebra instead of math 8. And so they were targeted, as they are every year. Just we had a few more that were able to be targeted this year.
Oh, I think I asked my question wrong. How many students have been showing up to the ones that-
Oh, you know, I know the enrollments.
Okay.
We do the count by day, but then we report it back weekly. So I'll probably know that early next week based on this week.
Great,
It's a good
thanks.
question. Good question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. Dr. McMahon, thank you for the presentation. And I'm sorry, I lost track. The first chart you showed us, the first group, what program was that?
The very first group, the pie chart, is Engage. That's the program for rising first, second, and third graders, to really, those who require a little more reading, a little more math support.
Okay. So when I was observing the pie chart, I recall seeing some of the bigger pieces of the pie were some of our districts or clusters with Title I schools in them, which is, I assume, how we would like to see that. But I noticed Annapolis was only 1%. It seemed like such an outlier. Do you have anything to share that could help us understand that?
Right. So we have the so the SOAR program is the Title I program. So in any district that has Title I schools, in any cluster that has Title I schools, then Engage usually is a little smaller, right? Because the students, we have over 315 elementary students involved in our Title I SOAR program this summer. And so then many of the other students in Annapolis, 32 additional students chose to engage, chose to join our Engage program.
Okay.
So the good news is Annapolis has a lot of students enrolled, and most of them are enrolled in SOAR.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Thank you. And so just help me real quick understand a little bit more about secondary summer school. So this is an opportunity that students could take advantage of meeting graduation requirements. Is that correct?
Well, summer school is mostly for students who struggled and want to raise grades, want to, now pass a class that they may have failed, mostly.
Okay.
In a couple of occasions, we have some courses for original credit, but it's only a few things, and we minimized that this year because we were really concentrating on recovery.
Right. So I was glancing at the list. I saw Fitness for Life.
Yes.
Health. Those are graduation requirements.
Yes,
That if students
that's right.
choose to take care of that over the summer, they can do that.
And we always have
as long as they, I guess, register by the end of the day today is what you're saying.
Yeah, and then what we tell them is when they register, because summer school got so big this year, that's an area where we did struggle with teachers. And so if they register by the end of the day today, we're hopeful that we haven't had, but we may have to put folks on a waiting list for a day or so. But
And I don't know if you can speak to this detail, but in the category of technology, there's several classes. Do these classes meet the foundations of technology requirement, or are these different?
Most of the ones offered in summer school, if not all, I don't have the list right in front of me, but the idea is they do meet the tech requirement.
Okay, that's helpful. So it sounds like a great opportunity for high school students if you are able to go live with these classes, that they can knock out one of those graduation requirements.
They can. The big push we're doing this summer, though, just to be honest, is the recovery of learning. Yes.
Sure. And are these classes going to be conducted the way we did classes in the spring? In other words, there's not a live attendance requirement. It's work they can complete on their schedule.
Right. In the spring, we had what I will term e-learning. We have moved into e-teaching now, right? So we have synchronous teaching going on now, which is it's exactly what we need to be doing. And it really provides us a nice pilot going into the fall, if in fact we end up in any way virtual.
So if a student is considering one of these classes, they need to be aware that there's a scheduled class. They have a schedule requirement. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Mr. Grannon?
Thank you, President Corkadal. I just have a few questions. So Dr. McMahon, I think I understood from your answer to Ms. Hummer that for the Title I SOAR program, to the extent invitations were not accepted, basically those seats were rolled over and other students were invited. Did that work the same for the Engage program for the non-Title I schools?
Right, it did. We invited almost 900 students for the Engage program. And of those 900, 338 of them accepted our invitations.
Got it. So does that ultimately mean that really any student in those grades, given that, relative acceptance rate, basically any student in those grades should have been invited then at a certain point?
Not quite any student. I mean, we still were looking for students who we really saw a need to support them with their math and their reading. And so if you were above grade level in math or reading, or if you didn't struggle, then you most likely did not get that invitation, because you can imagine in the virtual world, we're really targeting students who need some little bit of extra support, whether that's time on task, or whether it's focus, or whether it's conceptual understanding, whatever it is. The strategies we're using are going to be for the student who needs a little more time, a little more energy, a little more focus.
Got it. And what was the format of the invitations?
So depending, the invitations went out from central office, but depending on the school, they might have also gone through a principal. They might have been call home from a counselor, call home from a teacher. Reading teachers were involved. We did a lot of different things. And like we really try to do is tailor it to a relationship that's already been built. And so I can't tell you what any one student would have gotten, but I know all of those mechanisms were used to reach families.
When you say centralized, does that mean by mail?
No, central office, what I mean is somebody from central office who's part of the program development for the SOAR or Engage program would have emailed or telephoned.
Got it. I just, be very candid with why I'm asking these questions, because, I have a student in one of our schools who falls in the grade range for the Engage program, and I never received any invitation. I'm just wondering why, with the number of seats that were left open, that never happened.
I could check on that for you, Mr. Grannon.
Okay, and resource-wise, so so the Engage is synchronous learning. Resource-wise, if only about a third of the seats that were, invited are taken, what does that mean for the teachers that we've hired for those roles? That they have smaller classes.
Right. What we knew to be true is we knew we were looking for at least 300. Then when we had to go virtual, we shot for 600 students. So initially invitations went out for over 600 students, and the return was so low, and the story was one of, really stress over the COVID shutdown, that then we stepped back and we said, okay, we really need to extend more invitations, and we put teachers on hold. We had teachers on hold for quite a while, a matter of fact, a long time. And that's why those thanks to the teachers are really important, because we waited a long time to really nail down the number of teachers we would need, so that we were not employing people who were not going to be having a teaching job. So in the end, it all worked out, and we shared, we have teachers working in Engage. We have teachers working, are going to work in the Inspire program. We moved some teachers into curriculum writing. We've moved people around, but it's worked out that, a group of students has a teacher, and it's a relatively small group of students in all the cases.
Okay. Is the Inspire program the one that's for the second grade gifted and talented students?
So second grade is where we actually administer the various assessments for gifted and talented. And then as they enter third grade, if they've been identified, then they actually receive some advanced learning opportunities. We call it the single subject program of the advanced learner programs. So these students this year, the second graders that were assessed, they move in, and we decided that they're going to have an interesting time coming on board, because depending on what happens in the fall, onboarding them to the program is going to be different than it normally would be. And so we decided that this year, instead of based on the superintendent's desire for our most vulnerable learners to be focused on, that would be the rising third grader in that gifted and talented program.
Okay. And was that part of your presentation? Do we have numbers on those too?
Oh, we have that 133 students have been invited, but the challenge is that that program doesn't start until August. So we wanted to stay out of the milieu of the organization of all the other academies right now. And so those numbers, we don't have enrollment yet on those numbers that were, the numbers of invitations that were invited. We don't have the answers yet from all the families, because that program doesn't happen until August.
Thank you. My last question is based on the initial presentation. I understood that there were going to be some virtual camps, and I didn't hear anything about that.
So we consider the world language a virtual camp. And then there's one other camp that we don't have the exact numbers on, but Arlington Echo is doing some virtual camps. And so we'll update you on the Arlington Echo camps as soon as we get those numbers. That's exciting. They're virtual camps that are run by our outdoor educators. So
and
that's
the world language is only for rising sixth graders, though.
It is, yes. And so, so the other piece I would tell you that's very camp-like, depending on if you take advantage of the K-8 or pre-K-8 learning buffet, there's a lot of outdoor activities on that, a lot of great outdoor activities on that learning buffet, as well as activities across the disciplines. We've had over 1,500 families actually reach out and avail themselves of those activities. They change weekly too, so that should be fun for kids as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grannon. Ms. Shawhan.
Yes, firstly, thank you for your presentation. Really appreciate all of the data. I missed some of the data regarding the secondary summer school. So if you'd be so kind as to repeat that.
So traditionally we would have 900 to 1,000 students in secondary summer school. And this year, as of right now, hasn't closed yet, but as of right now, 1,452 students.
Excellent. And was that done via invitation as well, or is that just open?
Well, it is open, but it's really heavily done, as it is always, by the counselors at the secondary level.
Okay.
We look at, we look at the students who struggle the greatest and really reach out to their families.
Great. I want to talk about the NG recovery part of this. So if I wrote down the numbers correctly, there was 10,133 students invited. So I assume that encompasses the entire population that received a no grade for whatever reason.
That's correct.
And 723 are enrolled. And I would assume, it doesn't start till next week. So we don't actually know if they're engaged yet, but they're enrolled. So there's a delta there between the 10,133 and the 723. And so how are we going to, there's still a problem. The problem is they still have a no grade on their transcript. How are we going to attack that delta?
Well, the good news there is that delta was, we expected the delta because in some ways it was by design. If you got a B in third quarter and you decided you were going to either stop working or not finish your work, whatever the case may be, and you got an NG for fourth quarter, the answer was going to be you're going to remain with that B. And so that NG will turn into a B, right, eventually, right? And you'll get an S. I mean, you know, you're going to get that grade, right? So the notion is that we are not worried for many of those students. That delta really isn't that big for us because, in fact, the students who struggled the most aren't in that NG. If they got an NG and they really, really failed, right, they're in summer school.
Oh, okay.
But also, let me, if I could jump in, understand, no NG, that NG does not appear on a transcript.
Right.
Got it.
That NG appears on a report card, final grade, as per what the board requested. So every student will get a final grade. The NG is just on the report card. And so as Dr. McMahon explained, you could have the student had an A third marking period, said, well, I'm going to get an A anyway because I don't get anything less than what my third marking period grade was. And so their final grade's an A. So they're probably not going to engage in NG final grades. We knew that was going to be the case, but we want to offer students nonetheless.
The 10,100, that some of these are B or A third marking period students. Do we know what the percentage of that number represents, the B and the A third period marking period?
We do know that, Ms. Schulheim. I don't have that data for you at this moment in front of me.
Okay, can you get that?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just curious. And so just for the folks listening at home and also for my understanding, I'm just going to repeat period or both, those kids are in secondary summer school,
they were
bettering their knowledge and working towards a more satisfactory outcome. That is wholly different from the population that got a B or an A third marking period and mailed it in for the fourth quarter. Right. Okay, good. Because it got a little twisted in my head and I was I know folks are listening and watching. I, of course, as a member of this board, want to make sure I understand it as it is, so that I don't have folks saying, "Well, there's a big delta," blah blah blah. So just to clear up the confusion. And it's my understanding that in a normal summer, although I'm not sure what normal is anymore, we do have engaged SOAR. Those programs in a normal summer in person, of course.
Yes.
So the only difference this year is that we had more seats. We were able to invite more people, and of course, it is virtual.
That's correct.
Okay, great. And so, in a normal year, are our enrollments much greater than they are this year?
Well, I'll give you an example. In Engage, in a normal year, remember, we're only doing 3 grades. So I'll give you a normal year in person would have been 300 students.
Oh, okay.
And so we shot for 600, but the fact that we got 300 in this current climate, I'm very pleased with that number. Even though I wish, of course, that we could have served more students, but I'm pleased with it based on the climate of, exhaustion that many families are feeling.
Indeed. And what is it normally for SOAR?
For SOAR, I know they were shooting for 1,000 this year, so it normally wouldn't have been that high. And it changes according to the number of Title I schools. So I can tell you that 760, they're very pleased with it. So I can get you the delta, but I mean, they're very pleased with that number. That's a pretty robust number.
It is. And so for those students who got an E, who are struggling, the spring quarter was not a happy, and who decided not to engage, enroll, participate in any one of these, there's going to be a population of students that meet those sort of criteria. How are we going to best? I guess that's coming up, right? In your next presentation.
Yes.
How we're going to best support those? I definitely applaud your work, your staff's work for these numbers. This is great stuff. But it also, we don't want to leave anyone behind. And so I just wait for your next part. And thank you for all your work on this. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Great. Miss Antwine, any comments or questions on summer?
I of course do. Thank you very much, President Corkdale and Dr. McMahon, Dr. Arlotto. I believe that these enrichment programs are outstanding. We have the choice between doing something or doing nothing and moving forward in the summer. And the fact that you guys literally turned this around in just a few weeks to make these explosive programs is incredible. I also echo your sentiments as I look at the numbers, though they look low. For a summer program, these are excellent numbers. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And the work on that. Thank you. So Drake took my question because I wanted to know if students could still enroll. If they're out there listening right now, or their parents and families are listening right now, could they still enroll? So it was good to know that at least by the end of the workday today that they can. Even if they're not invited, they can still enroll.
Well, they can enroll summer school, which is the secondary program. They can still get in touch with us by the end of the school day today. The other programs have officially closed. However, if they had received an invitation and they call us, it's highly likely that we can serve them.
Excellent. And for those students whose families decline, because we understand most of these students we're talking about don't have a choice, but the need is still there. If their families decline for whatever reason, what happens for them? How do we enrich them still?
Right. So a little bit of part of the next presentation, but Ms. Schallheim asked that kind of too, so I will address it. So part of the learning recovery for the fall is that we actually have to figure out the learning loss and where students are against a benchmark of where they should be. And so we're engaged right now in selecting a tool to do that, tool set to do that. And we will be looking at the gaps of between where a student is and where a student should be in mathematics and in language arts reading in the K through 8 grouping of students for the summer fall.
Excellent, because that's a segue into my next question. At the end of this, if there are still identified struggles for those students whose families did accept, the next step for them then would be to utilize that tool to identify what kinds of programs can be built for the fall.
Well, that tool actually is a tool we'll use with all of our K-8 students, and it actually will help diagnostically take a look at where they are. And then that'll help our teachers identify what they have to do with them come the fall.
Okay, good. And then the next question is about those that we had, I think about 300 that were not engaged in e-learning at all. And then even some more than that were not engaged in school at all. Were any of those students invited to participate in these programs?
Absolutely, they were, yes.
And do we know offhand how many accepted those opportunities for the summer?
I know we have those numbers. I don't have them in front of me. We have those numbers. And we also know in many cases that we're working individually with those families. So many of them now have internet access and now will have the opportunity to engage fully in in an online fashion.
Wonderful. And then finally, these are excellent programs. Are they just, and I'm probably going to get the answer in a few minutes, but are they just programs designed for the summer, or are there plans to modify these for the fall and spring?
They're summer programs. They involve both academic rigor remediation, as well as high energy, exciting, engaging opportunities. I'll call them playful learning activities as well. Do we use some of them during the school year? Absolutely. We use pieces of them, but we try to make them special in the summer, acknowledging that a child's world opens up and is much more student-centered in the sense of the big world around them in the summertime.
Excellent. And then my very, very, very last question on this is the buffet. That, for clarification, that buffet is open up to any student at any time.
Pre-K
right?
through 8. However, if you were a 9th or 10th grader and you looked at some of the amazing things there, you would in no way feel like it's beneath you. There are some amazing things there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. McMahon.
Thank you, Ms. Antwine. Mr. Gilliland?
Thank you, Madam President. Dr. McMahon, thank you for this presentation. I think others have asked all the good questions and I'm left with remnants. So in the interest of time, I'll just leave it at thank you for this presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilliland. Mr. Lyon?
Thank you, Dr. McMahon. I have no questions or further comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. McMahon. As always, glad to hear good news and progress as you guys continue to work hard and navigate. Thank you so very much. And I'm going to turn this back over to you and Dr. Arlotto for the next half of this presentation.
Great. So Dr. Arlotto, want me to go ahead with the fall?
Sure. Let me just preface your comments and your presentation with, again, a thanks to you, the academics team, the chairs and co-chairs of each of the 14 subcommittees, of the work groups, including many of our stakeholders from around the county that are assisting us in this work, because this is not easy work. As we have said before on a number of occasions, we've never had schools closed before, and therefore we've never had to go through a reopening. And go through reopening that focuses on the health and safety of our students and staff first, and then build programming around that. And so that continues to be our focus. We will continue to focus on 3 large concepts that we've talked about in the past, and that's fully online if that becomes necessary, or that is necessary based on decisions made at the state level, the governor's level, and the Maryland Department and Anne Arundel County Departments of Health, as well as so we could be completely virtual. We could be 100% back in the classrooms and back in the buildings and brick and mortar as we have in the past, and then somewhere in between. And those are the hybrid models that the work groups have really been sort of running down, looking at what other counties are doing, what other states are doing, and what other countries are currently doing as they've begun to reopen their schools. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. McMahon to walk through some of the thoughts that and the work of the committees.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. So as you said, what are our key considerations? Well, there are the 3 possibilities that Dr. Arlotto outlined. And then what is driving us? Well, the health and welfare of our students and our faculty and our staff, right? That's the driver, the big, big, big driver. But we also need to understand, how do we meet the needs of all students, especially those students who fall into that opportunity gap, right? Our most vulnerable students. So some of the things that are going on in the background that you won't hear necessarily me delineate in detail today, but in the background, we are going one-to-one with Chromebooks. Every student with a Chromebook, not by the time school starts necessarily, but shortly thereafter. And we are right now engaged, matter of fact, as we speak, many teachers are looking at one of our new learning management system opportunities. We're involved in an RFP process and really looking at over several vendors to get a new learning management system. And then finally, one of the big initiatives is a K-5 backpack. We recognize that if in any way we're virtual at any time during the fall semester, we are going to need students to have some elements where a teacher can know that all those students have that element in their backpack. And so we're looking at a K-5 backpack that has some various manipulatives and composition books and art supplies and some various things that are needed so that all students have access to these materials when we move forward with learning in the fall, no matter if they're at home or in school in some fashion. We know we're going to have to address the parent, the employee, and the public expectations. We absolutely know that. And communication is going to be critical in all of this, and transparency. So with that, let me tell you about the fall committees. You know from prior presentation, there are 14 committees. I'll give you a chance to look at them. And you may say, that's an awful lot of committees to get work done. Well, you've got to remember, we need expertise. There are people leading these committees that have expertise in these areas. And then we need the expertise of any one committee on all the committees. So we really did a twofold process to make sure we populated these committees so that no matter when people meet, there's a driving force, a focused effort. And then there's also folks on that committee that know a lot about other work of the system and other needs so that we don't have to keep coming back to a home base to check for understanding. And in fact, the committees are doing extremely well because of that. The committees don't only have Anne Arundel County Public School employees, they also have community members from various groups that have a relationship with Anne Arundel County Public Schools. So that's exciting. As you look at these committees, you'll see 4 of the groups in red. When we look at them, we know those are the committees where if they say a model that we're looking at doesn't work, it may be actually a deal breaker. So why the 4 in red? Well, the 4 in red because of this. So HR and employee relations is all about staffing in our bargaining units. And if we choose a model where we're going to have difficulty with staffing, then that may be a deal breaker. Same with facilities. We choose a model where we don't have the custodial staff or the cleaning capabilities in a timely enough fashion. That may be a deal breaker. Food, nutrition, and services and transportation are one committee. You may think to yourself, why together? Because actually they complement each other very nicely. They do a lot of the same services. Different ends of the spectrum, but same processes. And transportation especially. If we can put 12 students on a bus and no more come the fall, well then transportation determines whether or not some models work or they don't work, just from a timeliness fashion of bus pickup and drop off at schools. And then finally, childcare. We know childcare is an issue that people have been talking about, and families need childcare in many cases if you have under a 12-year-old in your home. And so we know that some of the models are going to be more challenging than others. So with that, I'll tell you, all these committees are off to the races. They've been working very, very hard. And there are chairs of those committees that talk to one another. And then there is a steering committee that has a liaison to each of these committees. And so we're doing well in that sense. With that, we move on and we say, let us tell you about, as I just spoke, some of the things that we know, because a lot of school systems around the nation are starting to put up where they're going for the fall. We're not quite ready with where we're going, but as you may know, that as you build models, it's as important to know what you can't do as it is to know what you can do. So I'm going to show you a couple things where we've determined a few areas that are no longer being considered. So split sessions. Sounds very exciting because you could get an AM and a PM session in a school. But actually, it's very difficult. And those deal breaker committees that I talked about, transportation would have a very difficult time bringing 12 students on a bus in the morning and then picking them up again to take them home at 11:30 in the afternoon, and then picking up another group to get them back by maybe 1 o'clock for a PM session, and then taking them home again in the afternoon. So transportation says very difficult to do split sessions. So does facilities for all the cleaning. Because in fact, when we change students from any one area, any one classroom, we have to do serious cleaning. When you change students or change a teacher, change the people who are going to occupy that room. Staffing gets a little tricky because now you need twice as many staff members involved in the split sessions as you would in the in-person if it was one session. And finally, childcare. Although childcare seems like, well, if students were in school every day, wouldn't that be okay? Well, an AM PM childcare situation is tough for some working families because your young child may get home 11:30 in the morning, or they may be home all morning and get picked up at 12 noon to go in for a 1 o'clock start. So childcare becomes an issue as well. So I took a long time to explain that to say some of the models stop working, and so we take them off the consideration list. So split sessions, as well as an ABC rotation. Okay, so we move on. While Dr. Alato said that it's really important, we're listening to the CDC guidelines and the health department, Anne Arundel County Health Department. We also know that we're looking widely at what people are doing around the nation and the world, as he articulated. But we also knew we needed to hear from our families. And so as we looked, we put a survey together, and we're very proud of this. 45,000 families responded to our survey, and that represents over 79,000 of our students. That's an amazing return response rate. And so people did get engaged, and they did decide to tell us what they were looking at for the fall, what their biggest desires were for the fall. And so with that, the first one is their model choice. And we, of course, said, and if you took the survey, you know, we said, knowing what you know now, recognizing that may change come the fall. What would you want to do for your family and your students? And so this is what families told us. They said, basically, we'd love to be in person. If we can't be in person, 20% of them said, I want to be home. Home online, virtual learning. And 32% said, I don't mind virtual learning. Virtual learning is good. I'd like to send them a little bit, that hybrid model. We call it Virtual Plus. We call it Virtual Plus because really, if you really think about this, every student is a virtual student. The reason they're all virtual because at any time during the fall semester, any school or perhaps the district may end up having to be virtual again. So we have to assume every student is a virtual student, and then some students, this Virtual Plus, some students will be virtual and they'll go in 2 days a week, potentially, in some of the hybrid models. So with that, what about childcare? We were hearing a lot about childcare. So we asked a lot of questions about childcare, but this is a highlight today. And the highlight is that 75% of our families say we either don't need it, we don't have childcare needs, or we've already secured it. So we have 25% of our families still looking. That's still a big number. That's not small, but it is smaller than we thought it might have been. So something to watch for. And our child care committee is really critically working on this, and they're doing their own survey of our child care providers across Anne Arundel County, many of whom have closed their doors due to the fact that they can't operate right now with the low numbers of students because of social distancing. So it's a really tricky, complex set of variables that we're dealing with respect to childcare. We move into technology because that was an area in the spring that really had us worried. So we know from the survey that 98% of our families that took the survey said they have internet. Now here, we ask something a little differently. We said, come the fall, if your student needs a Chromebook, needs a technology device during the day, what kind of access do they have to it? Because we know in the spring, many of them were using their family's equipment. And if mom, dad, or their guardian, their caretaker goes back to work and takes the laptop with them, they wouldn't necessarily have it. So we specifically asked this question. And Good news is that 76% of them said, we're good, that our student would have access to it during the day if need be. But it's still worrisome that some of them have a little less access. Good news is our planned Chromebook one-to-one distribution should take care of this. And we move on and we said we really wanted to get at what the reopening priorities of our families were. So the data have natural points. So while there were about 8 to 10 selections on reopening priorities, 4 of them were over the 50% level, which means over 50% of the families said, this is important to me. They were able to pick 3 things. 4 of them came out over the 50% level, and here they are. They care about the disinfecting. They want things clean, both our schools and our buses. They want to make sure that we socially distance their children, their students, and we have all the safety requirements in place. They want to make sure that we are prepared for academic recovery, and they want to make sure that we're communicating with them. Those are their priorities. Now, when we move on to the learning priorities, at 80% of the families said robust academic learning. Please, please, please. So I think that we were basically saying, you know, this virtual world, if we do end up in it for any reason, or if we end up in a hybrid world or an in-person world, we want robust academic learning. Absolutely. We want to have our students being able to communicate and interact with other students. And we want that enrichment. They're missing that, you know, they're missing their sports and their clubs and their arts. So those are the things that they wanted for learning, for their learning priorities. And then we moved on to their health priorities. There were 16 options here. These 4 options. In the health priority, the question was, what's very, very highly important to you? What's neutral in your mindset? And what's of low importance to you? So these 4 out of the 16, the high importance outweighed the combination of neutral and low. So we know these 4 are the largest contenders for what our families are worried about. They definitely want to make sure we have the ability to wash hands in our schools. They want outdoor recess. They'd like to have social distancing in the classroom, and they are interested in the temperature checks. So we're feeling really great, and we thank the families, the stakeholders of Anne Arundel County Public Schools for answering the survey, because not only this information, this was highlights today, but we have a lot more, and that will be put up by the beginning of next week for all the public to see. We have to make the graphs work and everything, and have to deal with that, but it will be up public. But for today, what we'll say is the committees are doing the work. As Dr. Lotto said, we're shooting for an answer by the end of the month. And along the way, we will keep the public updated on the aacps.org/fall2020 website. I thank you for your time, and I know you may have some questions.
Dr. Arlotta, do you have anything to add before we open up for questions to the board?
No, I think we can jump right into questions. Thank you, Dr. McMahon. Thank you again. As I began with your team, really, it's the entire system, because we're all engaged in this. There is not a department that is not part of this process. Again, because we've never closed, we've never had to reopen, and know that these are conversations that are happening around the state, and excuse me, and around the country. I know that my colleagues, the superintendents, were meeting with Dr. Salmon earlier this morning. I was unable to be part of that meeting because of board commitments and our board meeting. But also I was on a call earlier this week with superintendents from around the country, talking about and sharing ideas about how each of us around the country intends to reopen. And that was an interesting conversation. And everybody is right where we are. Nobody has final answers. We are waiting, and I think it's important. I know our board members know that, but I'll reiterate for our board members and the larger public that we are closed officially. Our superintendent of schools for the state closed us on March 16th. We are not yet officially open. It will be the state superintendent of schools along with the governor that will reopen schools, and they will also give us some parameters around how schools can reopen around the state. We have not yet received that information. When we do, that will help us really zone in on a particular model about how we'll open schools in the fall. So with that, thank you, President Corkadell, and we're glad to take questions.
Great. Thank you so very much, Dr. Arlotto. We're going to go roll call on this one because I know multiple members have questions and comments to make. Mr. Ladd, I'm sorry, Ms. Hummer.
Yes, thank you. That was a lot of information to take in, and I think it reflects what everyone is hearing in their emails and on the street and everything, that everyone's very divided on this, and that there's not going to be any easy solution or anything that makes everyone happy. If I recall, when I filled out the survey, there was a question, and maybe I'm not recalling right, but will there be an option? I know transportation is a big issue. If we have to limit the number of students on a bus, will we have a way to ask and find out from parents if they are willing or able to drive their students to school rather than have them on a bus, so that could help alleviate some of those restrictions? Is that going to be something that's explored further?
I know the Transportation Committee is looking at that. At some point in time when the models are built, asking the public not only the model that they want, but also asking them questions about transportation, childcare, various things will have to go out again, because that will make a difference depending on how many people are willing or able to transport.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's my only question now. Thank you very much for the update. I know y'all are working hard on this.
Thank you, Ms. Hummer. Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Dr. McMahon, because that was very, very informative. Because like everybody's been saying, this is the question of the century. How are we going to reopen schools? So my question is, if we do the fully virtual, how will it look? Will we go back to how we did it in the spring semester, or will we do like school online?
Right. So it's a great question, Mr. Smith. It will definitely be e-teaching and learning, right? Electronic teaching and learning, not just, it will have the synchronous times for courses, for classes to meet. There's a lot of guidance nationally. I mean, you would have, if you were in high school as you are, you would have normally on an A day been in 4 90-minute periods. That's not suggested in a distance learning motif. It's for a high school student, it's more like 45 minutes. But still very robust. And then with supported learning time in the off hours. And so, yes, you'll have an opportunity for that. You'll also have an opportunity for clubs as well. And so we want to make sure that if we had to go virtual in any way, that it's a robust virtual environment. And Dr. Lotto and I were talking yesterday about things that are happening around the nation that are exciting in the virtual world for secondary students. And so people are talking about that on the academics committee. They're talking about that in many of the committees. What can we do to make sure, no matter what happens, our students are getting amazing learning and amazing support?
Now that makes sense for the core class. And so my next question is about like encores and extracurriculars. Like, what are we going to do about the technology classes, like tech ed or band, Yeah,
that's a great question. We were just engaged in a conversation yesterday about simulated learning, and we have a couple of opportunities to explore simulated learning where you can actually build things in a augmented reality or a simulated world. And so we're looking deeply into that for the summer. In some cases like the CAT centers, some of that learning is very tough if you're just solely virtual. So while the content can be learned and the concepts, it's the skills. So we're concerned about that. Absolutely. And
now with special education, how are we going to try to get that, like recreate that one-on-one time?
Yeah. So the one-on-one time, there's some amazing things happening in the special education world that's really positive. some of many of our special education families, our families who have special needs students, are telling us that this virtual environment, many of them are telling us it's really working for them very, very well. They get the one-on-one time either with Google Voice and a phone, or they get it in a virtual world. They get more smaller segments than they might have, individual segments than they might have in a classroom with 5 or 6 students. And so while I would say virtual isn't the panacea, for some students it is working. For others, we are looking deeply, the special ed committee is looking deeply at all the different options that we might be able to offer families. So some families could go ahead with some of their offerings in a virtual world, and others maybe really have to come face to face. So those are good questions you're asking. We're asking them too every day.
And my last question is probably the second biggest question of the century. What are we going to do about sports? Students have talked to me about that. They want to get back on the field. They're ready to get out the house. So if school were to be virtual, right, fully virtual, is there a possibility that we would have in-person sports?
So
let me jump in. I think the short answer is no. If a decision is made to go 100% online, that decision is really going to be made at that state level, saying you cannot bring students together. If I can't bring them together in a classroom, I'm not going to be able to bring them together on a sports field, right? We are hoping that we are not in 100% virtual, that we're either going to be back in buildings in some way, shape, or form, either 100% or in some kind of hybrid version. If we continue to move along the continuum that we are here in the state of Maryland in terms of the number of COVID cases, that's being watched carefully by the Department of Health and the governor's office, and if and when the governor moves us from stage 2 to stage 3. But to expand on that question a little bit, Mr. Smith, our athletics are overseen by the MPSSAA. That's the state organization that sets the rules and sets the guidelines for high school athletics. And so that organization is overseen by the Maryland State Department of Education and the state superintendent, Dr. Salmon. They have been forward thinking, and they've gotten some, I'll use the term waivers, of some of the rules in governing sports just in case we need them. So the state, they've already brought these, they brought this to the State Board of Education, who has approved some waivers so that, meaning things like when sports have to start. Maybe we don't start in August, maybe because of things we could start later in the year. The number of contests in a year is dictated by MPSSAA, and that's been waived. So because we might have to alter schedules so we can get some kind of sports in the fall and the winter and the spring, all dependent upon what's best in terms of health and safety for our students, coaches, and staff, right? And so they've been forward thinking. So now there are some of those waivers that are in place. Don't have to use them yet, but we may need to use them into the future. So we hope to be able to bring the students together in some way, shape, or form. Certainly, we'd love to have a football season and a volleyball season and a bocce season, but we have to. The time will tell. But the state organization is keeping a close eye on it, and then they'll dictate much of that to us and our athletic directors.
Thank you, Dr. Arlo. And if all else fails, we can always just play Madden. Thank you, Dr. McMahon, Dr. Arlo.
And there you have it, right?
Oh my goodness.
Those are
Mr. Smith, you're already shaping up to be quite a pleasure and a great addition to the board. Thank you so very much. Miss Ellis.
Thank you. Thank you again for a very helpful presentation. I do have a few questions. First of all, I apologize. A chainsaw just started down the street, so please let me know if it's a problem. Okay, so the first question on the survey was parents' comfort or what their preference is for school in person or online or a combination. And while it's easy to say that overwhelmingly parents chose in person, in fact, 51% of parents chose not in person, but maybe some variation or all online, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, Dr. Arlotto, my first question is there a possibility, a scenario where the state superintendent will require all students to be back in school, basically sort of as normal, full time?
So certainly that is a possibility, right? Just like she can, the law is already explicit that students have to be in school at certain ages, right? There is mandatory attendance. And as of now, that's not in effect because schools are not quote unquote open. And that was the case in the spring, right? Because schools were closed and we were virtual. So certainly the state superintendent could say, based on all of the input, CDC guidelines, Maryland Department of Health, the governor's office, I'm declaring schools are 100% open. She certainly could do that.
Okay, so considering all of the effort the whole school system has gone through to create an atmosphere for students to be able to do school remotely, if the superintendent were to make that statement that all students are back in school full time, does that are we not still able to offer an option to parents if the student, in other words, if we have a robust online program, can that just be one of the programs we offer? I'm trying to understand if we will have flexibility in that scenario.
So I hope that we'll have flexibility. Online learning has to be approved through the state of Maryland. We can't just offer an online program and say, yes, if you want to take it, you can take it. It has to be approved through the state of Maryland.
Okay.
But that said, I would suspect, Mrs. Ellis, that we will be allowed that option because we will, even if the state superintendent fully opens schools, we will have some families and some staff that are immunocompromised or otherwise at risk and will not come back. They will choose to not want to return their child or themselves, the staff member, to school. So I'm sort of banking on, and that's the reason that Dr. McMahon talked about, in the background, we're still working on one-to-one, a learning management system, having enough Chromebooks, and having a robust learning opportunities so that we are probably going to have some people, even if we go back 100% to answer your question, this hypothetical, that are going to want to still learn from home, and we need to have that as an option. I'm hoping that the state superintendent would allow us that option. I think she would, because she gets it. She realizes that not everybody's just going to walk back into a building based on the circumstances that are at hand. So I believe that we would have that option. That would be my best guess.
Okay. And I want to, and I guess another question is, could we potentially, let's say we're mostly online, virtual teaching. Could we focus on certain groups like we've talked about with special education, but focus our efforts on getting certain students in without having to open up for all students? Again, going back to the CAT students, a student who's learning to repair an engine or cut hair just can't really happen without getting their hands on. So could we potentially just identify, okay, these students really need to get in, and even if they rotate in and out to make those groups smaller. I mean, I've seen amazing things. I have kids who are arts students. They're in PVA, and it is, it's certainly ideal for them to be in person, but we've seen some amazing demonstrations of art happening online where entire ensembles come together and perform, and it's different, but it's amazing. So, but I'm concerned about those students who really need to get their hands on what they're doing.
So I think so the answer is yes. That is part of the conversation with the committees. Part of the ongoing conversation we've had really since day one is if and when we're allowed to open, who are we going to focus on first, right? And so it could be our youngest learners. It could be students with special needs. And the CAT centers are not every program, but many of the programs are sort of ready built for, they're already small classes, and many of those rooms are large, so we could spread the students out.
Right.
Right. Cosmetology, maybe not so much, but that is a possibility as well. And you know, the kitchens for baking or for culinary, not as easy to spread them out because of the confines. But the carpentry shop, very different. It's a big wide open room, and those classes by design, because of the needed safety measures in place for those classes, are small anyway. So that's absolutely, we've had those conversations about the CAT centers as a possibility of, if we can open, those are places that we will try and do that first.
Okay. As far as other possible variations with, for example, with magnets, we bus students all over the district. So if transportation is the concern for one of the scenarios, is it possible that the magnet classes themselves could go online so that students can be well, but then they go to, I guess a magnet student would either have to go to their home school for some classes, or that's
So
not an option, right?
Think of a magnet, it's not much different than a student with singletons in their schedule, right? You know, maybe you have a singleton AP class, AP physics, right? And it's often a singleton, similar to a magnet program. The bottom line is secondary, much, much more challenging to deal with in a hybrid mentality than it is to either go totally virtual or totally in person.
Right.
And so we're grappling with magnets as part of a big family of the secondary programs where it just gets more difficult to think about a hybrid story.
Right. And then I had an idea. This is something I've been thinking about for a while, and it was really great to see the numbers. And by the way, the participation in that survey is mind-blowing to me. That's a good way to get a real sense of how parents feel when you've got 94% participation. So that being said, I believe it was about 25% that do have childcare concerns. So that seems like a number that we can focus on. And I've had this idea about creating some sort of a network, maybe online, to match people up with other people who, first of all, might be willing to take on a family in their home because they normally have a child care facility that's not operating, something like that. Or a neighbor might be home with their kids and be willing to take, you know, the neighbor down the street or something like that. If we could create some sort of network to match people up. I mean, I know a lot of people are not working right now because of the situation and could use that way to spend their time and perhaps even earn money.
It's an interesting comment you're making. The Child Care Committee has been talking to child care providers, both in-home child care providers as well as small business, and then the larger daycare licensed facilities. And what they're hearing is that at the moment, many of them are closed. They're closed for lots of different reasons. Some are the social distancing is problematic. Others are because they don't have the staff. They lost staff too, and they lost the ability to have staff. So your idea is an interesting one because the nature of the beast will be that we have to figure this out. It's a community challenge, not just a school's challenge, right? The other piece we are doing right now, and our equity committee is really leading some of this effort and reminding us that although childcare, that 25%, it could be when we disaggregate by cluster, that any one of the clusters could be as high as 60%, right? The childcare could be focused in one area as a big need. And so that notion of coming together as a community to solve the childcare issue could be really something we need to do. We'll know more next week when all the data gets disaggregated.
Great. And then finally, I just want to make an observation or offer something to consider, which is that I know we have a lot of parents who feel strongly that students need to be back in the schools, and there's very, very important considerations as far as the social, emotional well-being of our students and the benefits they have with that in-person interaction. But I would caution that depending on the level of social distancing and the measures that have to be taken to carry that out, that could impact the level of benefit that students have with that in-person interaction. In other words, if a student is sitting in a desk behind plexiglass with a mask on, the benefits of that social interaction are greatly diminished. So that has to be part of the consideration, I believe.
I mean, point well taken. One of the things that's being talked about is when we come out with a model, that model has to have some depth and richness to it, because families are going to want to know more than just when the bus comes and when it drops off. They're really going to want to know the quality of the day that their child is going to spend if they send them to school. And so that's what the committees are working on, really trying to flesh out what will happen during those hours.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Mr. Grannon.
Thank you, President Corfidel. Just a couple of questions. Is the current conversation, to use the terms that you all were using, is the conversation focused on or considering greater needs for in-person learning for K through 5?
The answer is yes. That is absolutely part of the conversation and in answering Ms. Ellis's question earlier, as we focus on where are the greatest needs, we would see elementary as a greater need in getting those students back into the buildings. As we consider that, also understanding that in terms of scheduling and maintenance of the buildings, it's easier at the elementary level in a hybrid model than it is at the secondary level. And that was Dr. McMahon's point in also addressing Ms. Ellis's question. It is the concept of hybrid learning at the secondary level is very, very difficult, because one that we have to consider in health and safety that have as much as you can the children in the same place. Excuse me. Throughout at the elementary level, where you could have a fourth grade, half of that fourth grade class remains in that classroom all day long, versus the secondary level where that high school student has got to move from class to class. We go to math and social studies, and our friends go to English. They're all going to different classes. It's much, much more difficult and complex at the secondary level than it is at the elementary level.
Okay, that's cool. Hybrid learning, all virtual with all distance learning, is the conversation for K through 5. More of it should be synchronous than was the case the past couple of months. And I don't say that as a criticism. I just say, obviously we were, ramping up to get something online as quickly as possible, with an unforeseen pandemic. And I think people's schedules were such in this initial period that they were more hectic. I think if we're going to be in an all virtual or half virtual, whatever it is, environment in the fall, people's schedules, work-wise and just personally, will be more used to the pandemic. Let's put it that way. So while there were benefits to having a lot of flexibility in when students could do online learning, I think in the initial stages, I think if we were to go forward either with a hybrid model or certainly an all virtual model, that there would be a lot of benefits for a full year of virtual learning to having more synchronous scheduled time when students are supposed to be online doing certain things or actually getting instruction. And I'm just wondering, is that part of the conversation, especially for K through 5?
That is not only part of the conversation, that's part of the planning. That's our goal. We knew that that we were going to have to do some things differently going into the fall than what online learning looked like in the spring. And so absolutely, it's going to be less flexible, to use your word, Mr. Grannon, in that there will be, specific times that, and I'll use high school as an example, right? If my first period of the day is calculus, well, there's going to be a time that I'm going to log on and I'm going to see my calculus teacher and we're going to go through a calculus lesson. And then the rest of the period, and that might be for the first 20 minutes, that might be for the first half hour. And then the rest of the time will be me doing my work. And so absolutely, we know that it needs to be more robust and that students need to see their teachers and teachers need to see their students in real time.
Okay, but in particular for K through 5 as well.
Well, yes, I used the high school as an example, but absolutely we would be expecting the same at the elementary level.
Especially including reading groups that we didn't do in the springtime. Reading groups would be active, as well as the cultural arts would be there, but all of the disciplines would be represented and they would have time certains to actually meet their teacher of record.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Grannon. Ms. Schallheim?
Firstly, thank you so much for this presentation. Just like the last one, it was very informative. I'm very grateful for the information. A lot of my questions were tackled, but I do still have a couple. So we had that great slide of what we're no longer considering. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important for the broader community as well as board members to know and understand. Like an AM PM sounds great, doesn't work, that's wonderful. So which of the hybrid models at this moment in time seem the most viable?
We're sort of honing in on for the hybrid models 2 days a week of students in school. You've seen that some other counties have released something similar that they're considering. I think Loudoun County, Fairfax County, Queen Anne's County recently put something out. And that seems to be, in terms of what sort of the non-starters that Dr. McMahon talked about earlier in her presentation, those seem to be the ones that we think we can work best with, give the students some time in face-to-face, a couple of days a week, give us time in between in groups to get the buildings clean, and then 3 days of virtual at home. And so that's a model that the committees are really sort of honing in on and tweaking. Dr. McMahon, anything to add to that?
No, that's perfectly right. That's where they're at, and various renditions of that, but definitely the 2 day a week piece.
And to that end, I'm just thinking this through to its final implementation. There would be therefore consistency with regard to childcare. Like every week, my kid is going Tuesday, Thursdays for the first semester. I need to find childcare Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or someone to monitor e-learning on those days.
Correct.
That'll be my set day. So they're not going to be Tuesday, Thursday one week, and then Monday, Wednesday the next.
No.
I mean, I just see an utter train wreck of a disaster of childcare with that. So I'm glad you all are, obviously you've already thought of that. That's fantastic to hear. And then, would it be, so 3 days would be e-learning, but when I've read of, the other plans of other counties, at least what was printed in the media. And one of the days, like Friday or Monday, was specifically a teacher planning day and or something like that. So is that what you're envisioning too? Like that, yes, we'd have these 3 days of e-learning, but it would be, 3 days out of a week to do it. But Friday, my teacher might be in meetings all day or have office hours or something like that, or some combination.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we would, as part of the model, looking at a sort of a 4-day week in terms of teacher face-to-face engagement with their students, with that 5th day being time for professional development, building out their e-classrooms, could be office hours, could be catching up with individual students and following up, professional development, those kinds of things. So yes, that's part of the model.
That's really nice to hear. Okay, so and within that, I guess we'll know more when we get the employee survey results back, because I'm sure one of the questions is, you're a teacher or you're an administrator or a principal or an AP, and what are your needs in terms of childcare?
Yes.
To be able to balance with, if you're a 2nd grade teacher and you got 2 at home, like how are you going to do synchronized? How is that going to work? So do we have questions around that on the employee?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. And with regard to childcare, we asked, I loved the question set, I've already secured it with friends and family. I'm looking, I don't need it, this, that, or the other. Do we have a sense of, I need childcare, but I can't afford it? I didn't see that on the list. Are we thinking about that?
We are thinking about it. And the reason we're thinking about it is because our childcare committee is really looking at it. And one of the things that has come up nationwide is that of the people who need childcare, who have consistently had it all along, that won't be the issue. It's the new group of people who are going to need childcare, potentially going to need childcare based on a model, and they traditionally wouldn't have needed it. Or they can't rely on their family because their family is older and compromised in some way. And so they have to change their childcare. So nationally, people are looking at, maybe 20% of a population that wouldn't have needed it, needing it. And so we know that that's an issue, and we know that we have to figure that out. And we know that the employees fall right into that category, just like our families.
Absolutely.
But let me also add that, because I think you asked a great question. And so for the board and the larger public also, and this will be very unpopular, we as a school system will not be able to solve everybody's childcare needs.
Right.
We got to focus on teaching and learning and the health and safety of our students and staff. So I know that will be unpopular for some. We want to know about the childcare issues. We want to study them. That's the reason it's one of the working committees, because we know that will impact students, staff, and families. And the more we know about it, the more we study it, the better we can create schedules that create less dilemmas for people, right? Less conflict. But we as a school system, you as a board, will not be able to solve all the childcare issues that are out there. We just can't do that. We have to be very honest about that.
100%. Totally agreed. I asked that in part to yield that response so that we're all on the same page.
Absolutely.
I want to solve everyone's problem. I can't do that on a normal day. So how can I do that during a once in a century pandemic day? I cannot. But I'm glad that we are considering that subset of the population in our ongoing thinking and planning. I also want to make clear to the public and to those watching at home that, like Dr. Arlato said, we are not the final decision makers. I get emails every day. I get hit up on social media, open schools, or do this or do that or the other. Good golly, I would love to know what we're doing in the fall. Just like everybody else. And so I just want to drive home that point that that we can't scribble outside the line of what the governor and the state superintendent have going on in terms of their planning or what their decision might be. But as an individual board member who hears from the public on the daily, I hope that if the superintendent or the governor are watching, please let us know as soon as possible so we can plan, because I'm a planner and this drives me absolutely through a wall. And I think it does for most of us. And I think a lot of our families would like to know yesterday what we're doing. Let me going down my list of things. So the 2 days a week is helpful. We already asked questions about busing in the face of the 2 days a week. So I know that is an enormously important issue and will remain important, especially if the capacity of our buses decreases significantly. So I'm glad we're thinking about that. Nothing else is really popping in my mind at the moment. I'm just really grateful for the 14 committees. I love that we're looking at this holistically, that we're kicking over all the rocks. I'm glad that the communities are involved. I'm really grateful to the senior staff for spearheading this effort and for collecting all of this information. And I very much look forward to seeing the plan when we know what the plan is and the work of all of those committees. I definitely think that by the end of this, we're going to need to devote a full board meeting to recognitions because the list is growing daily. And I'm just really grateful to the whole team for this. I won't take up any more time. Thank you so much. Michelle, I think you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Yeah, sorry about that. Miss Antwine.
Thank you, President Corkadale, and thank you again, Dr. McMahon and Dr. Alato, for this incredible presentation and the work that has gone into something, as Mr. Smith pointed out, is probably the question of the century. So as they were going through and as members were asking questions, I have a list of follow-on questions in addition to my own. I'm very concerned about that huge contingency from the state level and how we move forward based on that. Is there any idea, any inkling about when that decision will be made? Will it be made a day before we're anticipated to start the fall, or what is the plan there based on your meetings with the state superintendent?
She's not indicated when she plans to let us know. So I don't have an answer to that. But we will continue to plan, and then as best we can, we will announce to our public what we plan to do by the end of this month so that people can start to plan around that, knowing that it could change either by what the state does or what's happening nationally with the virus. Things could change, but our plan is to roll out an option or options for parents to let us know which one they want to take advantage of for their children so that we can plan accordingly.
Excellent. And then in your studies, literally around the world to formulate something for Anne Arundel County Public Schools, what are you finding of some of the things that may be uniquely our need as we formulate these plans?
I haven't come across anything that I would characterize as uniquely ours. It is still because the virus can impact any of us at any time, and so we are following very closely what those countries that are ahead of us in terms of reducing and eliminating the curve, as it were, the vernacular that's used. And so what's happening in China, what's happening in South Korea, what's happening in Denmark, and Finland and Italy as they are reopening schools and learning from them as they're bringing students back into school. So they are social distancing, they are using masks, they are hand washing. Those are the things that appear to be working in those areas. Dr. McMahon, anything to add to that?
No, that's exactly right.
Okay, and if we continue virtually, either in a hybrid fashion or fully, the help desk, is my understanding, the help desk has been greatly overwhelmed with questions from parents and people in the community, as well as their primary duties back to the school system. What are there plans to expand the support for the help desk?
A lot of the committees are talking about that, whether it be a committee that's talking about family support needed in maybe the, I'll say the afternoon and the evening hours, or whether they're talking about faculty support and employee support. But many of the committees are talking about that, including the technology committee, expanding, and not only expanding it, but expanding it in a bilingual nature as well.
Oh, good.
But let me add that, Ms. Antoine, I would not characterize, I would not use the word overwhelmed.
No.
I think the help desk has managed it beautifully. We did add some folks, including some that speak a second language to that team, knowing there was going to be a need, right? We've never, and you've heard me talk about this before in the board meetings, that we've never handed out technology before that people are taking home, right? All of our help desk has been internal to help people internally. And so we knew that was going to be the case. So we did, Mr. Barlow and his team of technology did a really good job of putting some extra folks on board, some extra techs and others to help with those. But we also know that going one-to-one, we're going to have to create, I'm going to use the term loosely, an office. It won't be an office, but we're going to have to create more and better access for parents and students, because as you hand out Chromebooks, they will break down, they will stop working, they will get dropped, they will get lost, and we're going to have some working mechanisms to replace and repair and then assist people with their Chromebooks. So we're going to have to beef up that help desk, to use your term, going into the future. Just the fact that we're going to be one-to-one, and instead of having 0 Chromebooks leaving our schoolhouses, we'll have 85,000 leaving the schoolhouses.
So you're the educator, so I won't mince words on the terms overwhelmed compared to, there was definitely a difference between their primary work and we had full engineers having to do tier 1 work and simultaneously. So that was additional duties. No reflection on what has not been done. I didn't receive complaints. What I received was the fact that additional duties have been added to the help desk support. And so my question was, how are we accommodating that? And if we decide to continue this, how are we planning to expand it? So we'll go with that. I appreciate that response. Then we talk about overcrowding and social distancing. They don't go in the same sentence, right? We were overcrowded prior to COVID. We will have an overcrowding issue as we continue as a developing county. What are the plans if we should go back into a traditional setting to ensure that social distancing is in place, as the parents and the families have requested?
So really the only way to appropriately social distance is to have fewer people in the same location.
Right.
Right. That's you know that, we know that. So that's a really difficult question to answer. If we go back full time and there's a class of 30 in a physics class, there's going to be a class of 30 in a physics class. I won't have extra rooms and extra teachers in that high school to take that 30 and spread them out.
Right.
We just don't have the capacity to do that. So then we'll have to, so the next tier is, well, keeping a movement around the school building to a minimum, maybe eating lunches in your classroom as opposed to going into the cafeteria more time outside if we can arrange that, so the students can get some fresh air and get and separate students and staff from each other. But that is that's a really, you can't have both, right? We've got, if you look at the survey, it's interesting, Miss Antoine, but not surprising. There are 50% of our families saying they want their children back full-time 5 days a week, but they also want social distancing rules in place. And as you say, the two don't match. You can't do both. You can't have a class of 30 in physics or in 25 in a fourth grade class and keep them appropriately social distance. But we can work to mitigate some of that in case if we do go to, and that's by, again, having students move less. There wouldn't be group work, let's say, right? Students, we would keep them in rows and separated as much as possible within a classroom, as opposed to bringing them together and doing group work where they're now face to face. We would eliminate that. We would do masking. We would do, we will do hand washing and sanitizing stations throughout the school building. And so we're ordering those supplies, that PPE, so that we have that available in whatever capacity we do reopen.
Thank you. And then there was, I thought I saw on the chart provided a request for more temperature checks. And wanted to understand, when we talk temperature checks, are we talking about the forehead scanner where they go to the nurse's station each day? Or are they coming into school and the first thing they get is a temperature check before moving forward? How is that going to be administered, if at all?
So it might not be at all from us. The direction we are getting, the conversation we're having at the state level, myself and the other superintendents, is that the Department of Health will most likely, and again, we've not gotten final word on anything, but the Department of Health would be recommending that parents would manage temperature checks. Before a child leaves home, before they get on a bus, it'll be up to the parent to check their child's temperature. And if their temperature, they should know what their normal resting temperature is. And if it's elevated, that child should be kept home. That would be the direction that we would have here in our own county and across the state. It would not be at the bus driver taking temperature checks or at the schoolhouse door. The Maryland Department of Health right now is advising the state superintendent that that should be something that's done at home and keep the child, because if the child gets to school and has an elevated temperature, now the child's at school and could possibly be infecting others. We'd rather them staying at home if they've got an elevated temperature, and that would be left to the parents. So right now, that's not in our planning. It may be into the future, but that's not part of our planning based on the direction we're getting from the Maryland Department of Health and the Maryland State Department of Education.
Good. And then whether we go in a traditional fashion or we go hybrid or virtually, we will still be virtual in terms of people outside of students and employees. And so I wanted to understand how maybe the parents and the changes for parent interaction at the schools is being considered. For example, our parent-teacher conferences, our parent engagement, if there's something going on with the child, will they still have to do things virtually or set up appointments, or what's the plan for them?
Right now, the plan is that we will do all of that virtually.
Okay.
So we will do parent-teacher conferences, back to school night, because we just don't want to, we want to limit the exposure inside a building. And that's the recommendation sort of we're getting from the health officer, that if you are going to have children back, either full-time or half a class 2 days a week and another half class the other 2 days a week, we want to limit it to just that cohort of students and staff. You don't want to then introduce others, whether it's family. We would limit the use of the buildings from outside groups that normally rent our buildings, for example.
Right.
We would not allow that because we want to, and we also have to have time once the students leave in the afternoon for our building service crew to get in and then clean the buildings thoroughly for the next group of students on the next day. And we would not want outside users in the building. So that's a great question, Ms. Antoine. Thank you so much for asking that. I didn't get a chance to bring that up earlier, but that's an important aspect, that at least in the beginning, if and when we open again, either the hybrid model or full-time, we would be limiting it to students and staff only, our buildings, on an as needed basis only, and limiting, if allowing at all outside groups to use the buildings so that we can contain those cohorts of people. That's the safest way, the safest recommendation we're getting now from health officials.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And then I want to ask about truancy. I don't anticipate that the state laws for truancy will change no matter how we go back into schools. But I am concerned about, we shared that there will be more stringency applied, whether we go back to school physically or we do this virtually. And there will be circumstances where, say, a student didn't get on the computer on time, or they had to share a system, or there was technical difficulties, or in the same fashion, the parents are maybe refusing, or guardians refusing for the children to come to school because of what they've heard in the news or concerns or otherwise. What is the plan? Are the committees addressing truancy and some alternative responses when a child is not participating in school?
One of the committees, especially the committee that deals with instructional data, they are also the committee that deals with attendance, right? And at this point in time, how we take attendance is a critical question, because truancy and attendance go hand in hand. And so, and Dr. Arlotto, you might be able to say more, but at this point in time, we don't know exactly at the fall how attendance is going to be taken. And so until we define some of the parameters of what it means to attend, the issue of how we handle it will be different. But ultimately, we'll follow some of the same procedures we would follow in the in-person world. Certainly, the school administrators will be acknowledging on a daily basis, once the decision is made, how attendance is taken. They will be looking to evaluate and support students attending on a regular basis, as they do in the brick and mortar world.
And I would add it. Thank you, Dr. McMahon. That's exactly right. One, as Dr. McMahon said, we've not gotten direction from the state. The state has the attendance rules, the attendance laws. They will dictate to us what attendance means in the virtual world, or a hybrid world. And so we, myself, the other superintendents, are waiting for that information from Maryland State Department of Education. But regardless, the expectation is that students are engaged, whatever the rules are. And so, as Dr. McMahon said, we have those mechanisms in place. It's the counselor, it's the teacher, it's the assistant principal, it's the principal, it's the PPW, it's the social worker. Those are the folks that are reaching out and sometimes physically knocking on doors when a student doesn't come to school, whether it's virtually or otherwise. Those mechanisms are still in place because we want the students engaged.
Right. Bless you.
Thank you.
I have two more questions. Let's say we all go back. If at the state level, they can close all schools, but if we all go back and there is concern at a particular school, then it falls back to you, Dr. Arlotto, and the school system to determine how to manage that particular school. So, for example, if there's an outbreak, I'll use my favorite, meat, right? Does the entire cluster close down? Does the school close down? Does the system close down? What is the plan for that if there is a worst case scenario, and forbid it if it happens, but if there's a COVID outbreak?
So it would not be up to me, the local school superintendent. Those rules are going to have to be set at the state level and by the medical community. Just like if it were any other, put COVID aside, if it were tuberculosis or something else that a student contracted, we would be in touch with a local health department who's in touch with the CDC. They then would give us direction about what to do, how to clean the building, how to isolate children. Do we need to close a building? Do we not need to close a building? Do we close the cluster? So I just want to make that really clear that it would not be up to me. I don't make medical decisions. I have to rely on the medical community. But you ask a great question. And in fact, I had a conversation earlier this week with Dr. Kalyana Raman, who is the chief medical officer here for Anne Arundel County. And I asked him that exact question. I said, what are you thinking if and when we go back in some form or fashion, we've got children and staff back in a building, and there appears to be, use the term outbreak, but even if there's just one case, if I have one child or one adult in that building has tested positive, what will be your advice? How do we react? He doesn't have a definitive answer, but his response was, well, George, we'll take it, of course, on a case-by-case basis, but if it is a single student or a single staff member, we would isolate them, and we would probably isolate that class. It all depends on how many students that in the contact tracing did that student or staff come in contact with. That would dictate, do you quarantine that entire class? Maybe that grade? If that student or staff member didn't, if they were, I'm going to make this up, for example, just to expand your example, Ms. Antoine, it's a second grade teacher in a second grade class, and they didn't come in contact with any of the third, fourth, or fifth graders, then the advice would be for us to not quarantine them, but it would be to maybe quarantine that class. But if it turned out to be multiple cases in a school or in a cluster, then we might have to look at shutting down the school or shutting down multiple schools. And that will, of course, be on the advice of the medical community. I will also add, because I think it's a good time to do that, that Dr. Kalyana Raman, I think, has done a fantastic job of helping manage this crisis in Anne Arundel County. I think his team has been phenomenal, and his team includes our school nurses. They have been on the front lines in contact tracing because, of course, schools have been closed and our health rooms have been closed. All of that medical staff in the schools, all our school nurses and aides have been used by the state. One of the things is having available, not public, it would be available to students and staff in that building. Should somebody become symptomatic, Dr. Kalyana Raman and his team would have the ability to do COVID testing within our buildings. That's not a done deal. That's something that
again, we accept that, right? Could we set up a portal for maybe recommendations and concerns from the parents and the community as we move forward in the fall that could inform the way we do business in the spring or the following fall? Something that they could put in comments, questions, concerns. They can identify what clusters they're in. For example, we talked about childcare. Identify what those concerns are based on the outcomes that we're looking at as we move into the fall. Dr. Lotto, I can't hear you.
My apologies. I think the short answer is yes. We have some of that now. So as parents are emailing us with their questions, their concerns, their statements about how they intend for the fall to go, we are sharing that with the committee. So the appropriate committee is getting that information, and so they're able to see what parents are saying. We're getting lots of emails from lots of different folks about how they think the fall should open. And as you would imagine, and would be no surprise to you and your colleagues, Ms. Antoine, on the board, that it's from soup to nuts. It's from A to Z.
Right.
No way can you open without a vaccine to you must open 5 days a week with a full classroom and everything in between.
Excellent. Well, thank you both.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Antoine. Mr. Gilliland?
Thank you, Madam President, and Dr. Arlotto, Dr. McMahon. Thank you again for this. These plans are not easy to put together, nor are they easy to implement. So I appreciate the work that's unfolding. I think Mr. Smith asked one of the questions I was going to ask, and I know athletics is not the paramount topic for today, but I am getting a lot of questions about that throughout the community, and I appreciate your response, and certainly Mr. Smith. I think President Corkadell said it best. We appreciate you being here and your candor and sense of humor. One comment that I'll make, and then I do have a question, perhaps an unfair question as it relates to funding, but a comment, and Dr. Arlotto, I think you said it best, that we can't please everybody, and I would even further add to that, if we try to please everybody, we're going to fail. That's just a doomsday waiting to happen. But to the extent possible, when we have parents or families with multiple children in the school system, and if there is an on-day, off-day type scenario planned, to the extent possible, that can be, a consideration that, if parents have to work, on alternate means for daycare, et cetera, that, all the kids are in school on X day and Y day. I think it just makes it easier for those families. Again, I know that's one variable in a whole bowl of soup, but, to the extent that can be a factor or consideration, I think that would help families. My question, again, I think it is an unfair question for today, but I'll just throw it out because it's a question, but probably more of a concern. And that is as well thought out as this plan is, and I know it's still in development. We're going to move to implementation and evaluation, and certainly various versions of improvement to the plan as it unfolds. How much of this plan, as it's written today, is going to be jeopardized should the Board of Public Works have further funding reductions during its August meeting? And why I raise this today, as those funding cuts or potential reductions come into play in August, we're so much closer to the finish line to opening school in whatever format it is, and that can just throw a well thought out plan into the shredder. So I ask it, again, mostly as a concern, knowing that it's an unfair question that you may not be able to answer wholly today, and just raise it again also so that we're looking at potential, God forbid, plan B, C, D, whatever, to mitigate the funding loss risk that I think is very likely to happen. That was a ramble, and I apologize.
No, that's a, so to go back to the beginning, Mr. Gillen, we are not going to be able to please everybody. And so we're going to work to make decisions that we think are in the best interest of our students and our staffs. And it's going to be in the best interest of health and safety and of equity. That's what's leading our charge. That's what's leading our best thinking. And I know that we are not going to be able to please everybody, because not everybody sends their child to school from the same circumstances. And so we know that, but we'll continue to move forward as best we can in terms of making those decisions. Regarding your budget question, it's a good one. And the short answer is, I don't know exactly how it's going to impact, but the governor, the Board of Public Works, and then eventually what's going to have to go, as you well know, to the state legislature to make the decisions about the larger budget piece and cuts that we will see. I absolutely believe that we'll see some cuts in our FY21 and the board's FY21 budget. There's no doubt in my mind that we're going to see some cuts. We're going to feel some pain, and we're going to have to make some difficult decisions. That said, in terms of juxtapositioning that or overlaying that with how we're going to reopen, some of the things that we're going to need to reopen differently, we're going to be utilizing some of the federal CARES funds, and that's going to help us out, right? It's not going to be impacted by the state funds because they're federal CARES funds. So in terms of purchasing technology and getting to one-to-one, that's going to help us do that. In terms of buying some of the PPE that we're going to need, hand sanitizers, hand washing stations, face masks, some of those things to open in some way, shape, or form, we're going to be able to purchase some of that through the CARES federal funding, which again will not be impacted by a loss in state funding. But there will be a loss in state funding, and that could have a trickle-down effect in many of our different departments.
I appreciate that. And again, I am so appreciative of the CARES funding, but as you well know, and Mr. Shaknovich and the entire board, that's one-time funding.
Correct.
And, I don't see that as a recurring, maybe something will happen and there's a phase 2 or 3 of that. But, I just also know that once we start to do something and spend money on something, there's an expectation among the public, let's just call it that what you've done it once, you got to continue to do it. And then the school system's on the hook. And then I know that's got implications for future funding, for funding streams and budgets. So I appreciate your answer, again, knowing full well that it was an unfair question. But, again, I just raise it as a concern because I think a lot of things are up in the air as we look at the Board of Public Works and then the future BRFA that the General Assembly is going to have to consider. But again, lastly, I'll just say I appreciate this presentation, part 1 and part 2 of it today. A lot of thought and efforts going into it and a lot of volunteerism, I think, from the community at large is making this come to fruition, and I think quite well at that. So thank you, Dr. Arlotto. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dolan. Mr. Lott?
I'd just like to thank Dr. Arlotto, Dr. McMahon, and I know so many others contributed such a very thorough and thoughtful presentation. As far as questions and comments, I believe my colleagues have pretty well covered the waterfront, so I will defer at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lott. We have 2 more questions from board members that emerged for them in the course of our inquiries, and that is Mr. Smith and Ms. Schallheim. So we're going to go Mr. Smith first, and then Ms. Schallheim, and should be in good shape. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, President Corgadell, and thank you for taking this last question. But it's about grading. No matter how we send the students back to school, we want to make sure that they're actually taking in learning. So how will we be evaluating that with grades?
That's a great question, and one the committees are really dealing with, because in a virtual world, even though we'll be back fully in a synchronous environment, you still want things to work well. You don't want to overburden and overtax. So there's a lot of discussion going on right now in the committees about not to the level of 1 grade a week, by no means, but do we talk about grading and simplifying the nature of grading a little bit and really making it more streamlined across the district? That's a lot of conversation going on to make it easier to understand and easier for students to know what's due when, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a good question, and one that a lot of people are giving a lot of thought to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Schallheim.
Yes, I had a question. I'm so sorry that I forgot to ask this before, but with regard to cultural arts, and I'm glad that this is important to other parents because it's also important to me. I'm a fan of the arts, music, etc., and arts and music education, of course. And so, how I know that Dr. Nato and I talked about this very briefly the other day, but how will, say, a cultural arts teacher that has hundreds of students, which is different than a homeroom teacher that has 30, how will we limit their exposure, and kind of how will that work if we're in an in-person environment, in any form or fashion?
Right, it's a good question. At the elementary level, of course, that looks a little different than at the secondary level, but still the cultural arts people often have large class loads. Absolutely true. At the elementary level, there's a cultural arts group, there's a family, right? Including art and music and Triple E and those schools that have Triple E and physical education, health, et cetera, right? So they operate as a family, and that's worked really quite well. And they're talking about not only putting up those robust offerings, they offered some of the most robust offerings in the springtime. Not only are they talking about continuing that good work, but also integrating the work a little bit more so that a student may have a project or may have an experience that's both music and art oriented, or that incorporates the arts into a Triple E experience. So it is a good question. It's one we're thinking about, and you know, just to brag a bit, I think we might have the most amazing cultural arts teachers, you know, in the state of Maryland. They really are recognized statewide as leaders, and it shows. And so I know that the quality will stay high no matter how we go back to school in the fall.
Okay, great. I concur. My daughter's experience with cultural arts this spring was nothing short of fabulous. So thank you, Folger McKenzie Cultural Arts Department. A little shout out. With regard to things like band, and yes, I'm taking some personal privilege. I have a rising fourth grader who has been playing trumpet for a year and has been dying to start playing band. So I speak for that specific thing. I could see, I mean, we do virtual trumpet lessons now, and it's hard, but it's not impossible. Could there be, obviously in person would be better, but are you all thinking about a virtual environment for those sorts of things where they're not blowing droplets across rooms?
Right.
It'll be in
Absolutely.
their own house. Yeah.
Absolutely. The virtual environment, and I think it was Miss Ellis talked about some of the things that we piloted in the spring of being able to bring students together to work on a composition, whether it's choral or instrumental, simultaneously. I know Meade had an amazing experience in their graduation with a choral piece done, a combination of people coming together across the internet. So it can be done. We're also, you know, we're watching just like everyone is. If we bring students back in any fashion for sports and co-curricular clubs, maybe there's an opportunity to bring some students back for small sectionals. They would have to be socially distant. It wouldn't be exactly like a large band, but it would be something socially that would engage them in their music talents. So both the virtual and the in-person worlds being looked at.
I'm really glad to hear that because, you know, there's so much data that says, you know, that music education, arts education help students out in other areas. I'm glad that we are state recognized. I'm not at all surprised. My final bit, and I'm really sorry, this always happens. With regard to Chromebook delivery, you know, we're blessed in the sense that, you know, my daughter has an old laptop that she's been using for the spring. So she didn't get a Chromebook yet. So for that population where they've had a device that they've been able to use, they'll eventually, once all the other populations have been dealt with, they'll be also then receiving their Chromebooks.
Correct.
Okay. Great. And then my final thing is with regard to outside instruction and use of the outdoors as a learning environment and for decompression and unstructured play. I'm all about it. I'm really glad we're thinking about it. We have some wonderful courtyards and spaces that I feel are underutilized in our county and in our schools. And this is a wonderful time for us to hit the reset button, think about how we think about education on the whole. and really, I'm just going to be optimistic about it. Come out of this with being even better, really utilizing that space for education and for health and fitness more than we already do so wonderfully. And so I'm really glad that you all are thinking about that. And with that, I will yield the floor. I'm good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have one more question. This is definitely an important thing for everybody. So just bear with us, folks. We have one more question from Mr. Grannon. Mr. Grannon, at your convenience.
Thank you, President Corkle. I just want to understand from Dr. Olato, I guess it's kind of a two-part question. The plan that you're planning to roll out by the end of the month, if there hasn't been an indication from, well, the first question is, does that plan get first kind of pre-cleared by the superintendent before you announce it?
So my understanding is that we will have to have our reopening plans approved by Maryland State Department of Education. All the counties in the Maryland will have to submit a plan that's approved by the Maryland Department of Education.
Okay, so that answers that part. What I guess I'm struggling with a little bit is how could we have a plan that has, let's say, for example, kids back in school 100% of the time or even 50% of the time if there hasn't been an indication yet from the state superintendent that schools will in fact reopen?
I don't know. I mean, I am hoping that the state superintendent makes a decision in a very short period of time here in the next week or so that we can really hone in on, myself and all my colleagues around the state can really hone in on what our option is going to be, or options, and then put that out to our public. So
okay,
I've got to rely to some degree on the State Department of Education giving us the okay that schools will open and in what parameters they will be allowed to open.
That's what I guess I was trying to pin down, with all the usual caveats about this is not your decision, it's above your pay grade, all that stuff. You have factored in to your projected timeline of announcing a plan by the end of the month, your hope and expectation that there will be some guidance as to what you are allowed to do.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. That wasn't coming through to me before, but now I understand. Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Thank you guys very, very much. I know there was perhaps a little bit more questions than anticipated, but I think us and the public all learned a vast amount about what we know and what we don't know. And sounds like we've got a team effort underway, and I'm confident that we will make best decisions based on our circumstances. Thank you all so very much. I know you're burning the midnight oil on this. Okay, next item is 3.02, in-school student access to academic enrichment and extracurricular clubs. This was a presentation requested pre-COVID, and as we continue to catch up with our stuff, this is one of them. And just for regular information, upon conclusion of item 4.0, the board will be standing at ease for 30 minutes to take a brief lunch break, and we'll be returning for items sections 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass over the board here, the table here, to Dr. Arlotto and his team for their presentation. Dr. Arlotto.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity. As you alluded, this is something that we've wanted to bring to the board for some time. And so we're delighted. We've got a couple of folks that are going to present to you and members of the board and the public about some of the work that we've done, and in particular what our high schools have done to create some more and better access to extracurricular clubs. Academic really done a nice job of engaging their staff and students. So we'll give you a little bit of background, a little bit of information about how that is being done in each of the high schools. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Lucarelli.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. Good afternoon, President Corkadell, Vice President Ellis, Dr. Arlotto, and members of the board. I'm Dawn Lucarelli, Associate Superintendent of School Performance, and joining me for this presentation is Broadneck High School Principal Jim Todd. It is our pleasure today to provide you with information regarding in-school access to academic interventions, and extracurricular clubs. Mr. Todd?
So good afternoon, members of the board, and Dr. Arlotto. I certainly appreciate your time today. To start our presentation, we wanted to provide you with some background, some history, along with a little bit about the purpose or the reasons why that I and many of my colleagues have implemented some of these structures that we're going to talk about today. First, as a matter of reference, it was Arundel High School who was the first to research and implement what they called Wildcat Hour back in the 07-08 school year. And South River followed that up as our second school in this county with their Nest Hour in 2013. Both of these models that were implemented were lunch period interventions for students. And when I talked with the teams in doing research for this that implemented a lunch period model or a model between first and second period or an after school intervention model, there were four things that really came up as the purpose for why they became necessary. First and foremost was the opportunity to provide our students with access to their teachers and their classmates for things like help, redo, makeup assignments, particularly those that might require hands-on involvement, extension activities, seminars, for example, AP seminars that might happen leading up to AP exams, other mandated testing, preparations, and group projects when I talked about classmates. Beyond that, we wanted that opportunity to eliminate barriers that exist for students to access all those things that I talked about, whether that's transportation, competing interests, for example, athletics, competing with an after-school, club, or their willingness or ability to, meet with teachers during the school day, or other after-school responsibilities they have, with jobs and responsibilities with taking care of siblings and many, many other things that we know our high school students are responsible for. And then I talked about, participation in a wide variety of clubs, activities, other things. And then the final piece was the opportunity to eliminate some loss of instructional time for things that we would typically do. We would schedule assemblies like class meetings or college visits, other seminars that might be around wellness, lots of different things that we would do during the school day that might cause a student to miss instructional time. We began to schedule those things within these intervention periods. And so that was the common thread as I talked to my colleagues around the county.
So as we looked at the way they decided to structure these supports and enrichment, our schools began to research structures for these interventions. Many considered the hour lunch block. Leadership teams, they chose different models to best fit their own student needs. So there were some considerations that were included in these. Next slide, please. The ability to feed all students that need to purchase food, the availability of cafeteria staff, management and supervision and safety of students to ensure proper behaviors were occurring, and then also ways to engage students in that time so that they're simply not walking halls, so to speak. And so these considerations resulted in many different high schools choosing to offer this support between first and second periods, with one high school offering support for after school through their comprehensive STAR program. Nonetheless, the purpose remains the same. And we're waiting for the next slide to come up so you can see what I'm talking about.
Sorry for the delay. We're working on it.
That's okay. There you go. There it is. So I just spoke about this, but as you can see, so we have 5 high schools currently that do that during their around about an hour lunch period, 7 that through this process of determining what meets their needs, do it between first and second period. And then we have a school that provides that same type of support through after school teacher and their comprehensive STAR program with lots of different availability, advisory, and some other things that the other schools are able to offer. And then finally, we've been looking at the reflections from this And the way the intervention block, that each high school has a planning committee to make sure all this happens with, the best resources and best for what our students need. So there are differences among our schools, as I just showed you, and each school has developed it based on the needs that are unique for their situation. And when talking with high school principals and their leadership teams and teachers, they really feel strongly about the ability to be able to adapt these structures if it's no longer meeting the student needs or it becomes a safety concern. And so at this point, we are ready to take any questions regarding the intervention model that you may have.
Thank you very much. We have several questions, so I'll just go around, and if you don't have a question, just don't unmute, barring those who are joining us by phone. Ms. Hummer, unmute if you have any questions or comments. Seeing none, Mr. Smith, questions or comments?
Yes, I've just one question. So I know at Meade High School we have Pride Period, and we used to have Mustang Hour. It was the hour block, and they switched it up. Usually, like you said, concerns on like where students getting the best use out of it. So my question is, do any of the specialty schools have this intervention type?
So Chesapeake Science Point does. They do have an intervention period, like similar, I think, between first and second period as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Ms. Ellis, any
Thank you.
questions or comments?
I have a couple questions. Thank you so much for this. I have had students in high school, goodness, since 2014, still do, and I can speak for my students how much they value their Panther Hour. It really does provide tremendous opportunity for students to catch up if they've had absence or they're struggling in a class, but also to sort of get a real solid break during the day if they want to participate in a club or something like that. So I greatly value that our schools are doing this. I'm curious, has there been any data collection on if this has had an impact on students academically or otherwise since these programs
Not
are
at
rolled
the
out in schools?
Not at the county level, Mr. Todd. Are you aware of any?
So I can speak to two of the high schools. I was the principal at Old Mill High School for 5 years, where we implemented Pride Period there, and then here at Broadneck, where we implemented Room Block. And at Old Mill, we saw tremendous growth in both GPAs. We had tremendous reductions in referrals and suspensions over that time. Tremendous increases in standardized testing. As a result, we were able to make AYP in the final 2 years. So dating myself a little bit and recognizing this was several years ago. And moving on to Broadneck High School, we collected data, and we had a little bit, there were some different outcomes, right? We did not see significant increases in GPAs. We didn't see decreases either. We did not see increases in test results. We did not see decreases either. Same thing with AP results. And so we actually had a very frank, open dialogue with our student body and our community about that at the end of last year. We had discussions around whether or not it was worth the resource, associated, or the resources associated with Room Block if we aren't seeing gains in the things that we wanted to see gains in. And I was quickly reminded of all the benefits from a structure like this for students, just by way of how they feel about being at school, their opportunity to disengage in some cases for half an hour, the ability to eliminate the competing interests, which was something I talked about earlier. And, I love our students. They reminded me, Mr. Todd, that's something that you didn't account for, you did not measure. So I would say anecdotally or qualitatively that, yes, we saw gains here at Broadneck High School, but we could not quantify them while we were able to at Old Mill.
I greatly appreciate that answer. I'd be curious to know what what the differences were between the two schools, whether it be implementation or just a different student body. But that being said, we cannot minimize the importance of the social emotional payoff of offering this for our students. So I greatly appreciate that answer. And then two more things. Are teachers required to be available to interact with students during each of these hours?
So the short answer to that is yes. Teachers are engaged throughout. Again, I could only speak to Broadneck's current structure, but I know from talking to every one of my colleagues in preparation for this, that our teachers are engaged in one way, shape, or form with our students during that time. What that looks like and how much time and how frequently varies from school to school.
Okay, I'm thinking in terms of, I assume teachers have their planning period separately outside of this hour. So I would think that teachers, that they're on for that hour for their students. I know personally, I've had students who have had trouble accessing their teachers during this hour. They're only available one day a week, but it could be that that teacher is very involved in clubs and other activities. Okay.
It also, Mr. Todd's examples that he's been given, I think really speak to the unique nature of each of the high schools and the way we provide those supports.
Mm-hmm.
Because it takes, and some of our smaller schools that may not have as much itinerant staff, they take everybody to do multiple things, rather than some schools that have a lot of resources and can provide more access, so to speak, to clubs and other things besides the academic interventions. Sorry, Mr. Todd?
So I would just say that one of the benefits of the model that happens between first and second and the after school models, the benefit would be that teachers are available all the time during those interventions. So that's one of the pros of both of those models. For the lunch period, we also have to fit the teacher lunch period within that. Right. And so that's where we start creating these very large schedules. I know that Annapolis is very similar to that. That probably is what created that situation.
Got it. And then finally, I'm concerned about outdoor access and actual opportunity for unstructured time for our students in the middle of the day. I know this is something that everyone's starting to pay more attention to. The focus has largely been on increasing recess in elementary school, but people are starting to recognize more that recess should perhaps even be happening in our middle schools. And the same idea really applies to our high school students. I mean, as adults, yes, some of us are workaholics, but ideally an adult has a lunch break where they really do unwind and get away and from the structure of their day. So is there an opportunity to offer our students more outdoor access than they've traditionally had?
So I guess
I'm sorry. Let me just qualify that a little bit. I was just having a conversation with my daughter about this. So she was saying, boy, I would love during that hour to spend part of it to go outside and walk around the track, you know, or so just to qualify what I'm talking about.
So every school has different, very unique structures. The way their building is set up, the amount of staffing they have, which allows for supervision, right? If we're going to put students on a track, we need to have supervision out there as well. And so we have, at Broadneck, we've created a courtyard that students can access. I was surprised at how little interest there was in the courtyard. You know, we created that opportunity, and we do some things throughout the course of the year around wellness that gives students opportunities to go out and have a walking challenge or do some other things.
Okay. And I'm thinking more daily, but yeah.
Right. And I totally understand your concern. Northeast is another school that has a unique school set up with their cafeteria and an outside space so students can go out during that time. That's another example of the way the school is set up to allow what you're talking about more frequently.
Okay.
And some of the schools, I would add, some of the schools like Mr. Todd they open up the gym. It's not outdoor specifically, as you're saying, but he opens up the gym and students can go in for one of the 2 blocks they have during that lunch hour and access the gym or the weight room. I know some of the schools open up the weight room, and those kids, a team might go in and do a lift. And as Dr. Lucarelli said, whether it's the courtyard at Arundel, the middle courtyard at Arundel that you're very familiar with, that is an active place. Chesapeake High School has an outdoor patio where they've set up some tables and chairs for students to come outside their cafeteria, much like they do at Northeast. So every school is a little bit different in terms of maybe walking out and getting to the track. I don't know if that's something the students have suggested for a particular school, but you also then have to have the staff that oversees it. You have to have somebody that would be a duty position for a staff member to be there to oversee students if they went, say, onto the track and into the stadium to walk during that part of that block.
Okay, and one final question. I mean, I think I know the answer, but I so many people have brought this up to me who went to school in this district when I did. I'm an alumnus of Arundel, and our lunch hour, I was one of the oldest students in my grade, and so I was one of the first with a license, and lunch hour came, and we'd go get in my car and drive off and come back, and, you know, if we weren't back, then we were truants. So in other words, but we always came back because we didn't want to be truants. So my point is, why is it that students do not have the degree of freedom? Because we turned out okay. Why do students not have the degree of freedom that we used to?
Safety. I would use that one word. Having students come and go from the campus freely creates safety issues. We have the responsibility for the time they are in school for their safety. And so if we allow them to get into a car and maybe multiple kids in the car to run to get a burger during lunch and to come back, we don't have them under our supervision. So it's purely a safety issue. They're no longer in our supervision.
And is that a district level determination? State? I mean, I'm wondering what's changed since I was, and again, this is a conversation I've had with lots of people.
I don't know if there's a state law, but it has been at the district level. We have said that our campuses are closed, meaning we don't want students coming and going. It's been that way for the time that I've been here, and it's certainly something I support, that we can provide for meals for our students here, and we can provide for safety for our students here. And the minute they leave campus, I don't have any of that. Mr. Todd, as a high school principal, doesn't have any of that control.
Miss Ellis, I can also give you a little bit of historical perspective. I was a product of Anne Arundel County Public Schools and graduated from Glen Burnie at a time when the campus was totally open, and we could not. One of the reasons we had an open campus and we were able to leave was because, to Dr. Lotto's point, we couldn't get all the lunches through. There were too many of us. So they kind of encouraged us to leave for lunch and to go off campus. I will tell you though, a student was struck by a car and are killed almost every year of my tenure at Glen Burnie. So I had a different experience with the idea of safety in us leaving campus.
Thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Any questions?
All right. Next, Mr. Grana. Any comments? Okay. Hearing none. Ms. Schulheim.
Yes. Firstly, thank you for this presentation. It's something I asked for months and months ago. I'm delighted to finally get some information, and I'm grateful for your time. I realize that it might not be as timely now that we're in the midst of a once in a century pandemic. However, I was very interested in knowing more because the idea of a Panther Hour or a or the like is something that I didn't experience in high school. Although we had a lot of autonomy, I didn't. I'm a product of both private and public education, but was really intrigued by this. So when I visited Broadneck High School, I had a wonderful tour So thank you for that. And that's, the tours and the visiting of campuses, which is what prompted me to ask for this. And so one thing that really I was struck by in watching the presentation is that this is almost a universal occurrence, which is wonderful. But then the one thing that struck out to me was the one school that doesn't have this during the day. And we talked a lot about the reasonings for having this, like removing barriers, providing equal access, allowing students to leave and go home to take care of their siblings. I believe that's a universal thing across the school system, across the county. And so my question is why isn't it fully consistent? Because I'm pretty sure the one school that doesn't do this during the school day is Severna Park. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so why is it that it's important to remove barriers and offer this either during lunch or between the first and second period at literally every single other school in our system, but one, and that one school happens to be what most people call a pressure cooker. There's some really unsavory nicknames for the school, and it's had a problem with mental health and social emotional, issues in the past. And so I need to know why it's not fully consistent.
So part of that reason, Ms. Schulheim, we try to explain is that it really is unique to each school. And so in the case of Severna Park, their team has decided that they meet the needs of their students in different ways. So I do have a list here somewhere of everything, because in doing this over the many months and just being familiar with the schools, I asked that very question. And so their team was able to provide me with everything that they do for students' mental health, well-being through advisory, their after-school programs. Teachers are required to have school hours after school. Feel like they're in a community where kids can get back to the school, so it's a little bit different. They have some of the highest test scores. I'm not saying everyone. I realize there are many different populations at Severna Park, and they have and I don't know how familiar, and I'd almost have to get you additional information because I don't have it right here in front of me. But their STAR program, the Students Taking Actions Responsibly, is a very comprehensive program outlined over many years to provide the types of social emotional supports that you're talking about.
Right, and understood. But I do know my district pretty well and my community, and I do know that it's not a walkable school, not by a long shot. If you live down in the Jones catchment area, you're not walking up Ritchie to go to high school. You're taking a bus, and if you don't have a car, if you don't have another means to get back to the school later for that, and you have to take the bus home, then that is a barrier, and you cannot then avail yourself of the after school program. And so from where I sit, be sort of Debbie Downer about it, but I would love this to be consistent, fully consistent, system-wide, just like the other 12 schools that have it either during lunch or between a period. That to me isn't a barrier. That to me isn't an opportunity lost for some students who might otherwise really be excited about that, and not just for the time to take a breath, right, between classes, but to see their teacher during the day if they ride a bus and they don't have another option to participate. Because I think this is an opportunity gap from where I sit. And so I love this idea. I think we don't give our young people enough credit to manage their time, their gift of time for these hours. In the broader, in our broader society, our school system is so fabulous that in 12 schools recognizes that, you have this time, you can do X, Y, or Z based on your situation. If you have a redo to do, that's directed, you have to go do that. But if not, you can go study in the library, or you can go sit in the courtyard, or I think even the gym might be open in some of these schools if memory serves. And that's a wonderful gift that might not pay in terms of, like you said, test scores or grades, but could pay dividends for someone's mental health, And so I guess, this isn't a mandate. I'm not going to motion. I just really would love to see this happen at our one and only school that doesn't have this during the day, that does have a huge population that cannot walk to Severna Park and might not otherwise be able to participate. So how is it fair if a group of kids can participate but others can't? That's an equity issue in my mind. And so I would love to see, I'm not going to move, I'm not going to direct, but I'm really imploring you all to look at this holistically, because I'm sure Crofton will have something similar when they open, God willing, when we get back in that building for real. And so please make it consistent and universal, and please continue to offer this. And I know that some of the middle schools have, or at least I think they do, either some sort of recess or some sort of break, a day or two a week or whatever that is. I loved what my colleague said about broadening that too at that level. I think it's so important. I had ADHD as a kid. I have ADHD as an adult. My attention span is limited for sure. 7-hour meetings are really hard. And so what I'm saying is that it's good to take a breather and a breath in between classes, and the weight of the academics and the other components of Wednesday kind of lift a little bit. So please find a way to do this. I don't know why it's not consistent throughout the district, but I would definitely like.
If I may, I do appreciate your comments, Ms. Schallheim, and we'll be looking at all this. I am happy to hear you say you're not ready to make any kind of change at this point, because I would not recommend making any systemic decisions just because we don't know what the fall is going to look like anyway. But I appreciate your comments. I understand where you're coming from.
You see this? And so we're down on the list relative to the other, huge list of problems we have. Don't provide me with a situation where I would have to move. I just please do this. My suggestion to you. So not direct.
For you, and you took the time to do this research and help us with this presentation. So thank you very, very much for that. My question is, I just don't know the difference between this hour and the advisory period. Can you please explain that, please?
You
want me to take that?
Because I can do it, or you can do it. Either one. I tell you what, Ms. Chad, you go ahead and take the question, and I'll add.
So advisory is really more of a lesson opportunity. It's about relationship building and some teaching of the day. It may be social emotional, it may be goal setting, it may be college and career related there are lots of my lab where my classmates did part three of a section in science teacher, and I can go hands on. I can go do that. So it's. I hope that helped.
Would when this
Correct.
good in the virtual environment, have some of these clubs or are they engaged in something virtually for the my understanding that these periods have been very supportive, especially for the introverts or the procrastinators or those that have other responsibilities. It helps. So did it expand the virtual environment?
We had for e-learn, like teachers. Conditioning video going online if they were available as well. So we did those kinds of things in the virtual environment. We would continue those things, maybe at a more robust level if this is what it's going to look like. All part, we actually have future committees is around, totally around extracurricular clubs that are part of all the cultural committee, all that they're trying to figure out how we can more fully engage our students depending on the way we open our schools in the fall.
It helps tremendously. Remember how important it was to that me careful carried on with Dr. Rivers. So having this understanding from you all how to apply it in the different my last question is to change the like other other types of clubs, they do that.
These they won't.
So
Mr.
So as a parent has had children at 3 different high schools, so I've experienced
leaving campus for food. And Dr. Law said we can't do that for obvious safety reasons. Makes a lot of sense. So my thing is, look what we have now. Food deliveries, Uber Eats, Grubhub. Is that possible at the schools? Or Dr. Lotto, would you like to comment on that? Like, is that really feasible?
So no, I would not like to comment on that. But I appreciate you bringing it up. And I say that, Mr. Smith, tongue in cheek. That too provides a problem when we've got students ordering food from lots of different places and having it delivered to campus. I think Mr. Todd, who's been principal at several schools, as I have, can speak to that, sort of boots on the ground. If lots of different students are asking lots of different delivery folks to come onto campus, that creates its own safety issue. And then they show up with the food and then I have to find you because I don't know you ordered it, or you have to be waiting at the door to get that food and then exchange money with somebody. And that creates its own safety concerns. So that's the reason that we don't allow it. We don't want food to be brought back and forth from delivery folks on and off campus. I don't know if Mr. Todd, you've got anything to add to that, but that's sort of my take on it. I sort of get where you're going, Mr. Smith, and sort of giving the students choice. I think that's what sort of you're alluding to, giving them some choice about foods they might want to eat on campus, but it creates its own safety issues by having numerous people on the campus, finding the student that ordered the food, making sure they've exchanged money, who's responsible if the student doesn't show up at the door to meet the person to get the food. What if that food's delivery is late and now you've gone back to physics class? Do I come get you out of physics class to come get your food? Not going to do that, right? You get what I'm saying.
The only thing I would add, Dr. Arlotto, is that for any student who's going to connect with anyone on the outside, We're required to take their identification. We're required to scan it to check and make sure that they meet, the school system's criteria around allowing access to students. And that would be impossible if even in 1 hour, 200 of our 2,000 students purchase food.
I want to thank you for both of your comments, because I only asked that question because I know another student's probably going to ask that question in the future. You probably got to ask that question because, I know a number of kids have reached out to say, hey, why can't I order Popeyes? I like the chicken sandwich,
Right.
So that's why I just want to make sure that, students know what's going on, and there's always a method behind the rules. We're not just doing it just because, we want to, oppress you or whatnot. So I just really want to thank you both for taking the time, an hour or so to give us, enlighten us on these wonderful opportunities. So thank you.
It was a great question. Thank you.
Looks like we have our wrap-up question and comments from Ms. Schalheim. Ms. Schalheim.
I wanted to echo what Ms. Hummer and Mr. Smith just said. So for constituents listening at home, following along, surely going to post something about this later. Please reach out to Principal Bathurst and use your voice and advocate for what you want. And like we all should and we all should do. I had a flashback to a very well-known 80s movie. The title I'm not going to say, but there was a pizza delivery in the classroom. I think all of us of a certain age know where I'm going. It wasn't a good look in that movie. It's not a good look in reality. But I also wanted to take the time to say that food and nutrition services on school campuses has also evolved in a very lovely way since those days. I remember green hot dogs in my elementary school in Los Angeles. It was gross. But now there's the grab and go options at several schools, including Broadneck, which are fabulous. And so just much praise to that evolution of things as well. And with regard to for it being used for clubs, again, the equity issue, like, and some students can't avail themselves of clubs when when other students can, and other schools that via these blocks. What a great use of that time for clubs and extracurricular activities. So thank you again so much for this presentation. Long time coming, really happy to have it now, and just a lot of gratitude to you both. So
Thank you.
And let me, if I could just add to that,
Sure.
Mrs. Schalheim. So Mr. Hand, I'm sure, would be delighted that you invoked.
You stole my thunder there.
Class. So Mr. Hand would be very appreciative. But let me also say, just because you bring it up, that when you talk about food nutrition services, Ms. Reese and her team do an amazing job. They do they talk to the students. They do try and offer a variety of students to grab and go and some other things, as you said. But there are also actually rules. There are laws that don't allow us to have competing food in a building when food service is in operation. So that's another reason that we can't have deliveries, but we can't have competing foods in buildings while food service is in operation.
Yeah, that's awesome point. And then, as far as suggestion boxes, I'm sure that a suggestion produce the grab and go. So if other students have other suggestions, fly them by your board member. I'll send it to our lovely and wonderful Ms. Howell, and she will direct it to the right staff member. So use your voice for all kinds of things. See where it can get you. So thank you so much. And I love the reference to the man. Gotta go watch that movie now.
Well, I believe that pizza was ordered because it's our time.
It's our time.
Yeah, it's our time.
I could probably quote it from beginning to end. Thank you so much.
So speaking of our time, before I move beyond section 3, we did receive some public comments, and I want to make sure that that is publicly reported on. Ms. Howell, could you please provide the summary report of the comments that we received on items 3.01 and 3.02.
Yes, so we received 23 comments for item 3.01. We received 3 comments for general public comment, and we did not receive any comment for item 3.02. Any other comments that were received that did not contain the required information or were not received by the cutoff at 12 noon yesterday were not posted to the public. However, they are always still sent to the board members for their review and consideration.
Great. And of course, further instructions on how you can submit public comments can be found at www.aacps.org/public testimony. At this time, the board is going to stand at ease for exactly 30 minutes, and I will ask the board members to please log off and log back in by 2:05 at the latest, at which time, once we have quorum, we will be resuming with items contained in section 5, 6, 7, and 8. Thank you all very much.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
You mean log back in completely? Be shut. You want us to shut down? I worry about getting back in.
Okay, you're fine. You're fine. I just want to make sure that we are not presenting an OMA or quorum constriction. So that is fine to mute your you can mute your video as well as your audio, but I would just proceed cautiously and suggest members just hit the leave button and then go back in using your calendar link. Mr. Leib, I know you're experiencing problems, and anybody else that is too can do the same, but we'd like to get people off this platform for the purposes of the stand at ease break. And so with that in mind, we are officially at ease, resuming in at 2:05. Thank you very much.